Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the first Scottish Police Authority Board meeting of 2022. If the IT should fail from my end, I've asked Jane Ryder, our Vice Chair, if she would step in, which she's kindly agreed to do that. I have no apologies from board members for the meeting, although Fiona McQueen has had to have another urgent meeting this morning and will be joining us, I hope, before 1 o'clock for the board meeting. I'm required to ask if any board member has an interest which they feel they should declare at the beginning of the meeting on any item of the meeting. I can see no declarations. I would ask the board members to confirm there's no other business they wish to raise. None has been raised with me apart from that which is on the agenda. Thank you. We're going to take items 8 to 10 in private in accordance with our standing orders. Are the board members agreed to taking those items? Thank you. If I can just move on to the minute of our meeting of the 24th of November and ask for approval of those minutes, which you've had previously. I've had no notifications. Thank you very much. And in terms of the rolling action log of matters arising, one action is proposed for closure, and I'm inviting members to approve the log or ask any questions of clarification. Are there any questions of clarification, or can I just move to approval of our rolling action log? Thank you very much. At each board meeting, I say in public issues which have been decided by the board in between meetings, and there are two. Members took the decision by correspondence to approve the contract award for the supply and delivery of 4 liquid chromatography triple quadruple mass spectrometers. I'm going to call them TQMS from now on. So the TQMS are our 4 big pieces of kit for our forensic services. And what they do essentially is increase the sensitivity and specificity, yielding lower detection and quantification limits for items. So you can find very small items in a sample, and that they're essential for effective modern business within forensic services. So that's the decision we made to purchase 4 of those. And the other decision we took by correspondence was to award a contract in respect of the purchase of electric vehicles. Again, the timing was important there to make a decision between board meetings, and that has been discussed in detail. It will be discussed in detail as they go on. Those purchases are made under Grant McRae's supervision, chair of Resources Committee, and Chris Brown, with our colleagues, of course, in Police Scotland. So I'm very pleased with those. Any questions from board members about those 2 decisions? Thank you very much indeed. We come to my chair's report, which you've had. I've got 2 items just to raise that the Chief Constable and I were able to attend Vic Emery's funeral in Newcastle last week to pay our respects and offer our very sincere condolences to Vic's wife and his 3 daughters and the wider family. And it was a very moving ceremony for Vic Emery, and I was very pleased to be there. And my other comment is just to offer my and the board's congratulations to DCC Will Kerr on his election to the executive board of Interpol. And that is a great credit individually to DCC Kerr and to the standing of Police Scotland within international policing. So congratulations to DCC Kerr. Delighted to see that. I will take any questions on my report now, if there are any. Thank you very much. So I'm now going to come to the committee chair's report, each of which is in the agenda. I'm going to come in this order. I'm going to ask Paul Eadie, as chair of legal committee, if he has anything he wishes to add or emphasise in his report.
Yeah, just to say, Chair, that at both of the committee meetings we had discussions surrounding non-disclosure agreements, and we sought and received assurance that firstly we used them very sparingly, but when they were used, they were in line with ACAS guidelines.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions from the board to Paul Eadie? If there aren't, I'm going to ask Alistair Hay, Chair of Complaints and Conduct Committee, to speak to his report.
Apologies, Chair. I was still on mute. Thank you very much. The report stands as read. You'll note that we had 2 additional meetings over and above our normal routine business. That was to deal with the senior officer matter. There's nothing I'd like to highlight at this stage, but I would welcome any questions or comments from fellow board members and others.
Thank you, Alistair. Jane Ryder.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Alistair. I wonder if I could just ask you to tease out just a little bit on the Dame Angelini review, and in particular, pleased to see that so many actions have been complete. But could you just tease out a little, and particularly for the SPA, because I see you've asked Police Scotland as well, but how many of these actions are within the SPA control or Police Scotland control? How many are not? And the other thing is, do you have reasonable expected target dates for the completion of the open actions?
Thank you.
Okay, no, thank you for those questions, Jane. I mean, this is a key piece of work, and there's a lot of focus taking place within the SPA and across all the agencies that are involved in this review. What I can tell you is there's a total of 31 recommendations where the SPA has an involvement. Of those 31 recommendations, there's 12 where Scottish Government or the SPA singly or jointly has a lead in this. Scottish Government have identified this. 7 of these recommendations are considered to be complete at this stage, and they're complete in as far as they've actually been up to the ministerial group within the overall governance structure and have been signed off there. And there are 5 recommendations within those 12 that are on track against the due dates. And when I say on track, these are now very short timescales, 3 of which will actually complete this quarter, and the remaining 2 are scheduled to complete within the first quarter of 22-23. In relation to the wider ones, everything within our action plan is being reported as being on track. However, there is a big caveat within all of that, because there is a lot of dependency with other agencies, and some of the work in terms of that dependency is being developed. You know, an example of that where legislative change is required, Scottish Government have obviously been developing this, and it is their intention, I understand, to consult further on this and perhaps and likely go out to a wider public consultation next year. So if you look at it overall, then in terms of the SP involvement, where we have control, I think we're very solidly on track. But that communication and working in partnership, where we're not fully in control but have an involvement in it, within the limitations of complex work, I think we're well on track with these things. It's probably worth just mentioning very, very briefly where we are with the oversight of the work that the recommendations that are under Police Scotland's lead, under their control. They're progressing extremely well as well. 16 of them are complete. They've had additional oversight from the HMI, who's given very solid assurance on the progress that they're making. And what we have also committed to do is that the next Complaints and Conduct Committee meeting, they're going to give us more detail in terms of their action plan and their associated timescales, though they did not flag up at the last meeting any serious concerns for us. So hopefully that answers your questions, Jane.
I think it does, and I think that indicates to us that at the time of your next meeting, the 2nd of March, I think it is,
yeah,
you should be between the SPA and Police Scotland substantially complete, if not virtually complete of all the actions which are within those Police Scotland or SPA direct control, and then it then becomes a matter of dependency with others. That's my understanding of what the conclusion I draw is. Would that be correct?
Yeah, we're certainly within the SPA. We will substantially have completed the work by the end of the first quarter of next year. Police Scotland are on track with the work they're doing, but absolutely there are a number of dependencies with other agencies that we will support, and as that work develops, I'll be able to update the progress on that back to this committee. Sorry, not this committee, this board.
Thank you.
Thank you. And just to be clear, Alistair, in order that we're not too opaque about this, Dame Angelini made recommendations about changes in the legislation. Yeah. And that's one of the significant dependencies. And that is not a matter for the SPA, although we'll be deeply involved, no doubt, when proposals are made. So I just want to make that clear. So there's a whole range of agencies involved in here, but changing the law around some aspects of law around this is a significant issue too, which is being discussed, of course, within our ministerial group. Alistair, you and I attended with our police colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely, Chair. Thank you for just summarising that.
Thank you. Any other questions on this one? Thank you very much. I come next to Mary Pitt-Casely, Chair of our People Committee. Mary.
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, I've nothing specifically to highlight. I think the report is quite a full summary of the key issues that were discussed at the committee and the actions that were agreed. But obviously, I'm very happy to take any questions or to take account of any comments from authority members.
Any comments or questions? Maybe I could just use my prerogative, Mary, just to ask you this. I know that the next inspection from HMICS will be about the strategic workforce plan, which you mentioned. I know you've been very deeply involved within your committee and then to the board on this issue. You mentioned it briefly. I wonder if there's anything further you wish to say to the board, because I would be interested in your attitude here.
Yeah, I haven't yet discussed that upcoming inspection, but it clearly is a very important one that I know authority members will be very keen to see the outcome of. I'm sure that progress is being made in relation to strategic workforce planning, but it's not an overnight job, and obviously we'll need to keep track of it and make sure that it meets the needs of the authority as well as Police Scotland.
Thank you very much. I was in discussion with the Chief Inspector Constabulary this week, and because this is going to be in a slightly new form, I was with Jane Ryder on that call with Barry Sillars. There'll be a greater intensity of preparation and collaboration in leading up to that inspection, is my expectation, with a requirement for a self-evaluation against indicators and evidence. So that's going to be a very interesting process that will take place. And I am sure David Page will be equally involved from the Police Scotland side in that. And that might be something that we might want to just have a meeting together about, just in preparation.
That would be very good.
Yeah, with David and his team. Would that be okay, David, to meet? Great, thank you very much. I come now to the Policing Performance Committee and Chair Michelle Miller. Michelle.
Thanks, Chair. I don't really have anything to add. There's a couple of areas that I'll come back to. One was in relation to the report on violence against women and girls, which is a substantive item today. So I think I can say more then. And the other is in relation to the 101 response times. But again, that's, I think, covered or addressed in the Chief Constable's report. So I'll come back to it at that point, if that's all right. But I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Michelle. Are there any questions for the Chair of our Performance Committee? Thank you. Thank you very much. And the policing of COP26, the oversight group, going to come to Tom Halpin, the Chair of that group.
Thank you, Chair. The report stands before you. We undertook that the lessons learned would be captured. We've had our first meeting on 17th of December, as you see, and there's one scheduled for early March. to ensure the smooth return to normal, if you want to say. But one point I would draw members' attention to was the polling that was commissioned by SPA with the citizens of Glasgow in relation to the policing of COP26. And very encouragingly, more than 80% were satisfied with the way it was policed and the way that marches, etc., were organised. So in terms of the overall aims, that was a source of reassurance for us. It's independent of the committee itself. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yeah, a very interesting poll from the people of Glasgow, their opinion. Any questions for Tom Halpin on that issue? Thank you. And I have a report from Grant McRae, Chair of our Resources Committee.
Thank you, Chair. Just two things to comment on. One is that, as members will be aware, there are substantial benefits coming through from the activity and expenditure on change, and we've asked for some further thought to be given as to how these can best be explained in this year's coming annual report and accounts for 2021-22, because I think it's very important that the public are aware of what the benefits are. The other thing to mention is that, as already touched on, we're buying a number of electric vehicles for Police Scotland, and as the number of vehicles purchases is growing, we think that it would be quite helpful to have a review of lessons learned and benefits being delivered from these significant purchases before we're too deeply into this programme. Otherwise, happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Just as a matter of curiosity, Grant, do we know what proportion of the fleet is going to be electric and how that compares to other police services? I'm not saying to answer that now, but the board might be interested in having a look at that in shorter time.
I can't give you an exact figure at the moment because it's a rolling acquisition programme, but I think by the end of this accounting year, we'll have about 15% of the fleet in electric form. And there's a limited choice available from in the market at the moment, but that's changing all the time. So it's likely to be an interesting development over time. And I'm afraid I cannot give you a figure for where we stand in relation to the other police forces around the country, but I know that Police Scotland were very much in the lead in trying to go for a substantially all-electric fleet in the course of the next few years.
Thank you. David Page, maybe you could help with this.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I mean, just a little bit more detail on that. Our target is we'll have 1,000 electric or hybrid vehicles by the end of this summer, which is about 30% of the entire fleet. So we're making good progress. And as Grant said, we're probably leading in terms of the rest of the UK on this, principally because we were moving on it as an overall strategy quite early. So we're making good progress, and we're grateful for the additional investment we've had from the Scottish Government. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And we'll come back to that at some stage, either a committee or the board. I think we're interested in the utility of the electric fleet and lessons learned on that, as well as the environmental impact. So thank you very much. Are there any other committee chairs reports? I don't believe there are. I know the Audit and Risk Committee are due to meet tomorrow, but we'll pick that up at our next board meeting. So if there are no other reports, I mean, the reason why we spend some time writing and talking about those reports is that that's where the meat of the work of the authority is undertaken. Committee reports are published on the website, and their committee minutes are published on the website, so you can get more details there. So if we're finished there, can I move to item 5 and to welcome the Chief Constable in Livingston and ask you, Chief Constable, if you'd like to present your report to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to start by associating myself with your opening comments around the sad death of Vic Emery. Vic was a man I knew well, and it was a privilege to be able to pay my personal respects and indeed represent the whole of policing in Scotland at his funeral last Thursday with yourself. Vic has colleagues know, is highly regarded as an industrialist across the world over decades. 77 when he died, and still, to my eyes, working full time. It seemed to be every day a very, very committed individual, and of course respected as an industrialist here in Scotland, but also enormously respected for his public service. He really played a significant role in the early years, at times difficult early years, of shaping the new National Police Service. It came from his previous role as chairman of the Scottish Police Services Authority, and then from 2012, when he was appointed as the first chair of the Scottish Police Authority. I was deeply saddened by his death the week before Christmas, and my thoughts are with his family. And as I said, Chair, it was a privilege to accompany you to his funeral in the northeast of England last week. Turning to my report, I hope members will agree that it underlines the depth, the breadth, the complexity of policing need in Scotland, and outlines the proactive and responsive measures that we take to protect our communities and hold offenders to account, hold them to justice on behalf of society. I'll highlight some of the significant points raised in my report and touch on some other relevant matters. I'll begin, if I may, with the tragic death of 16-year-old Amber Gibson, who was discovered dead within Cadswell Park, Hamilton, late in November. Amber had previously been reported as missing, and following investigation by detective officers from our major investigation team, our MIT, supported by local police in Lanarkshire, a 19-year-old man was subsequently arrested and charged with Amber's murder. A 43-year-old man has also been arrested and charged in connection with Amber's death, and the matter is now clearly before the court. On Boxing Day, Sunday, the 26th of December, Christmas falling over a weekend this year, Dennis and Mary Fell, who were a married, retired couple, both aged 73, were tragically found dead within their home in Livingston. In regard to the death of Mr. and Mrs. Fell, a 19-year-old man has now been arrested and charged with their murder, again following a MIT investigation, working very closely with local officers in West Lothian. The deaths of Mr. and Mrs. Fell, the death of Amber Gibson are shocking, they're tragic, they're deeply, deeply upsetting, and my thoughts and condolences are with those who have lost loved ones. Murders are iconic crimes which go to the heart of public confidence in policing, and as a result, go to the heart of police legitimacy. How society treats its dead and their families is key in a caring and just society. The ability to respond professionally and thoroughly to unexplained deaths and to provide answers for families, in my view, is a core duty of an effective police service. The investigation of deaths, of murders, homicides, is an area where the National Service has driven high standards of investigation and compassion. Police Scotland was established in April 2013. Since that time, 523 murders and culpable homicides have been committed, with only 3 of those remaining undetected, and work continues on all 3. Each death has unique circumstances, and of course is a tragedy for the individual and their family. Every investigation presenting its own challenges and specific requirements. As policing responds to such tragic deaths, it's important to remember the lasting devastation that criminal deaths, murders, can have for loved ones and for the communities in which they lived, and the additional impact that an absence of answers can cause as the years pass. Therefore, unresolved and undetected murder cases from the past are never closed in Scotland. In this regard, Caroline Glacken was just 14 years old when her body was discovered in the River Leven, West Dunbartonshire, in August of 1996. A murder investigation was carried out at the time. However, despite the extensive inquiries and work undertaken, no person was identified or charged in respect of her death. But following work by Police Scotland's Homicide Governance Review Team, a unit initiated and established since Police Scotland was established in 2012, and a subsequent investigation led by detective officers from our major investigation team on Wednesday of 24th November 2021. Two men and a woman, all in their early 40s, were arrested and have now been charged with Caroline's murder. My thoughts, of course, remain with Caroline's family, but I thank everyone who's assisted with our inquiries into this matter. A week after the arrests in relation to Caroline Glacken's death, in early December of last year, two men, both aged 29, were arrested and charged with the murder of Anthony Parsons. Anthony, who was known as Tony, was 63 when he was reported missing, having failed to return home from a charity cycle ride from Fort William to his home in Stirlingshire in late 2017. An extensive missing person investigation was undertaken at the time, but Tony wasn't traced. In January of last year, human remains were discovered in a remote location near to Bridge of Orchy in the Argyll and Bute area, and those remains were subsequently identified as Tony's. These cases all illustrate how our policing model in Scotland ensures we can respond to serious crime and major incidents and provide all our communities with the support of specialist capabilities when they are needed, wherever they are needed. Members will note a number of arrests in regard to organised crime and drug dealing, as well as the seizure of significant quantities of controlled drugs that are provided in my written report. All of us know the devastating impact that drugs deaths have on Scotland's communities, often the most deprived communities. Policing, of course, has an important role in reducing the number of people who lose their lives to drugs. Vital, crucial that we continue to target dealers so we can bring them to justice and help prevent illicit substances being supplied on Scotland's streets. Equally, we continue to work closely with communities and other agencies, including the Drugs Deaths Task Force, to reduce the demand for drugs and also the impact of drug addiction, seeking at all times to ensure that support is available, effective, timely support is available, so that interventions can be made to assist all those affected by drug abuse. Action to protect our communities from threat, from risk, from harm, an essential duty of policing, and in that regard, my report outlines the enforcement that has been undertaken on the roads of Scotland, including a week of action to target insurance offences and a focus over the festive period on drink and drunk driving. These initiatives resulted in over 200 insurance and 600 drink and drunk driving offences being detected. The action, in my view, sends a clear message to those who put people at risk through their selfishness, through their recklessness, that they will be pursued and they will be held to account for their dangerous conduct. Our domestic abuse campaign, encouraging those with concerns for relatives, friends, colleagues or neighbours to contact the police, was also heavily promoted during December and continues this month. We know that over the holiday period, the festive period, that being indoors and being within a domestic setting can put some people at a high level of risk. As outlined in the report, Deputy Chief Constable Malcolm Graham and Detective Chief Superintendent Samantha Falls provided evidence to the Criminal Justice Committee of the Scottish Parliament in December of last year, all part of a series of sessions that the committee are having to consider how the criminal justice system as a whole responds to violence against women and girls. And later in today's meeting, as Michelle Miller alluded to in her committee report, DCC Graham, who's going to be joined this morning by Detective Chief Superintendent Laura McCluckie, will present information on the significant and diverse work ongoing within policing and in conjunction with partners, including survivors groups, to tackle the vital issue of violence against women and girls. And I strongly welcome the opportunity for this wider discussion with the authority this morning. Chair, as illustrated, I hope, in my written report and my remarks this morning, our response to serious crime and our proactive work to protect communities right across Scotland continued right across the festive period, at a time when many people in Scotland were rightly enjoying some holiday time with their friends and family. I'm very grateful to officers and staff who demonstrate compassion and commitment to public service during this period, while facing the same personal and professional difficulties and pressures as everyone else. Such dedication was evident over the festive period, with many officers and staff on duty to keep people safe at what can be a time, as we all know, of high emotion and intensity. And the valuable contribution officers and staff make to the lives and well-being of our fellow citizens, of the coherence and safety of our communities, was continuously demonstrated, in my view, during the last 2 years of the pandemic. Coronavirus remains a significant challenge for everyone in Scotland, all sectors and organisations, including policing, where unavoidable high absence rates have put pressure on resources and service delivery. Over the Christmas period, working right through that festive period, Police Scotland took quick action to ensure continuity of quality policing to all the communities across Scotland, to maximise the availability of officers and staff in frontline community-based duties. This included the deployment of more than 300 officers from specialist functions, also over 250 probationary constables with appropriate support and supervision, all deployed to support local policing divisions. And of course, maintaining our non-emergency 101 and emergency 999 services for the public has been vital, again, as Michelle Miller alluded to in her update. I've previously outlined the specific action taken to support our call handling response to the intense demands that we have faced. And our early assessment is that both the 101 and 999 services performed well during the festive period. And in that regard, I would report to members that between Christmas Eve, between the 24th of December and the 7th of January of this year, 999 calls were answered on average within 7 seconds, while non-emergency 101 calls were answered in less than 2 minutes. Of course, we'll continue to keep all arrangements relating to coronavirus under close review. Like everyone across Scotland, we welcome the easements that have recently been announced. But however we progress and proceed from now, protecting the public and protecting the safety and well-being of our officers and staff and their families will continue to be central to all our actions and decisions, and will continue to be at the forefront of my thinking. Chair, I'd like to make some comments in regard to our people. My written report makes reference to the retirement of Assistant Chief Constables Bernard Higgins and Judy Heaton, and outlines some of the consequential changes that I've made to senior leadership responsibilities. The team will be strengthened over the coming weeks as the Scottish Police Authority, with my advice and support, look to appoint some new Assistant Chief Constables, and I look forward to the additional impact and insight that new Assistant Chief Constables will provide to the organisation. As all colleagues know, ACC Bernard Higgins was latterly Gold Commander during Operation Urim, the COP26 Climate Change Conference, and during his 33-year policing career, Bernie has made an enormous contribution to the safety and the security of the people of Scotland. And again, at the public board meeting this morning, I would like to reiterate my personal thanks and those of all his colleagues in Police Scotland for his public service. ACC Judy Heaton was one of 4 serving and former Police Scotland officers that were recognised for their outstanding public service in Her Majesty's New Year honours. Judy, as well as Chief Superintendent Louise Blakelock, Chief Inspector Marlene Bailey, were awarded the Queen's Police Medal. Well, Graham Anderson, who is now retired, but prior to that had been the lead events planning officer within our Tayside division, was awarded an MBA, and I would publicly record my warmest congratulations and thanks to all the awardees and their families for their professionalism and their dedication to serving the public. Of course, Chair, I hope, as my report and my comments today illustrate, committed public service is undertaken by all our police officers and staff across all our communities every minute of every day. I've consistently underlined that the people within the Police Service of Scotland are key to the success of policing in Scotland. My report does outline recognition of some of that work. I would pick out the Scottish Women Development Forum, SWDF, which received the Championing Gender Equality Award, and the Scottish Public Services Award ceremony that were held at the Scottish Parliament in December. It's a great achievement for this vital and active staff association. In addition, Chair, along with yourself, it was a real pleasure and privilege in November of last year to attend the Scottish Police Federation's annual awards ceremony in Edinburgh. The event was an opportunity to recognise the important and valuable role of the Scottish Police Federation and the significant contribution made by police officers throughout the whole of Scotland. It gave me the chance to underline my personal support for everything that they are doing. Chair, I will stop there. Happy to take a number of questions. My deputies, as always, are part of the meeting today. DCC Fiona Taylor is not here today. She is taking some well-earned annual leave. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. Before I bring in the first question, which will be from Tom Halpin, just a couple of points from myself. The appointment of senior officers is a critical role for the authority. It is absolutely central to the effective policing of Scotland to have the outstanding senior officers that we have. And I rely fully on the Chief Constable and his engagement and his professional advice in making those appointments. And I look forward to those meeting the candidates tomorrow and making offers of appointment for suitable candidates. The other question, my question for you, Chief Constable, is in this remarkable figure of 3 unsolved murders that occurred since Police Scotland. I think it is a remarkable figure. Do you think it's above what you might expect from a police service, or do you think that you would always want a 100% solving of murders? I mean, just give me it was a surprise to me just how high the detection rate was for murder. Could you say a little bit more about that and your attitude?
I think the statistical relevance of those figures are clear. I think if you look across the world, I genuinely think you would find it difficult to find comparative levels of detection in regard to criminal deaths. The other thing I would say, if I may, is as important as that is, and it is absolutely important, as I say, I think it's absolutely crucial to police legitimacy that our professional competence is evident, that people could see that the organisation that polices them has high levels of professional competence, high ethical standards, produces evidence that is admissible, recognises the rights of victims, but also recognises the rights of accused, recognises the rights of wider communities. But equally important as is our effective investigation and detection of murders and culpable homicides is actually our response to unexplained deaths. What we've known over the years is that it's often a failure to adequately or professionally respond to circumstances that do not actually result in criminality, but do leave families and communities with poor answers because we rush to conclusions, or we do not take the necessary steps, whether it's in regard to maintaining the sanctity of a location or a locus and making sure that we do all the thorough steps required, so that if it is death by inadventure, if it is death by suicide or some other non-criminal matter, we're clear that we can provide answers to those families. And I think that's been a massive improvement that Police Scotland has brought to bear in regard to the police response. And colleagues will be aware of a number of cases that continue over decades and it has that are not criminal in nature, but because of the poor response, the initial poor response to those unexplained deaths, it's caused real pain and anguish for families and communities. So I think our response to criminal deaths is of the highest standard. I think you would be validated from any feedback you took from the Crown Office and others in that regard. But I also think, equally as importantly, it's our ability to respond effectively to unexplained deaths and give answers to families that is also a significant improvement that's been brought about by operating as a single service in Scotland. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Constable. I move now to Tom Halpin to ask his question.
Thank you, Chair and Chief Constable, for your report. There's two parts to my question, really, and it comes from the public interest in recent events in Scotland. The first one's around missing persons. We have some high-profile missing persons in Scotland just now. I can only send my support and best and sincerest thoughts, and I'm sure others would, to the family of Alice Bunn, who was last seen on New Year's Day in Portobello. And while I name Alice, I'm conscious there are other families there feeling the exact same thing, so I don't underestimate that. And so it's with all these priorities and things going on there, that finding Alice and others like her remains the highest priority within that. But also it was encouraging to see the use of new technology, drones in particular, in the searches for these people. And I'd just like some comment from you on the learning, the emerging learning coming from the use of drones and such, and where might that develop further. And the other area is we've seen, we saw changes in the leadership of the drugs death task force, and in terms of policing, just reassurance around the role in the drug deaths task force, what clarity of just what is that ongoing role, and the learning now from naloxone, and there's been very positive coverage of that. Your observations on the use of naloxone being administered by police, and those are the two areas of public interest I'm asking about.
Thanks, Tom. Grateful for the questions, and I agree with the areas of real significant public interest. In regard to missing persons, so by way of example, this morning when I came into police headquarters, I reviewed 24-hour incident of note that is prepared through our 3C and through our criminal intelligence capabilities, and it highlights the critical incidents and the critical issues of concern, and every time high-risk missing persons are included within that. So by way of example, this morning, I was really concerned, and even before I came onto the call, 10 minutes before the call, was receiving an update. There had been a female, a 14-year-old girl, a foreign national from America who had gone missing in the Glasgow area. And I was looking for an update on that. And again, thankfully, had been recovered safely this morning, and inquiries are going to continue as to why she had gone missing from her family. I give that by way of example, just as you gave the example of the tragic day of Alice Bunn going missing on New Year's Day. That shows that this happens every day. It's a key part of the police responsibility. It's owned very, very closely by local policing, but it's also supported by specialists. It's supported by the use of a specialist crime division, whether it's looking to try and find the telephone that may have been used by somebody that's gone missing. When did they last access a bank account? When did they last use an ATM? Is there CCTV? And of course, technology in terms of the use of search is something that we've increasingly used. And that is something where the use of air support through drones has really been a significant development for us, and one that I think has proven its worth. And I think that, again, the support of the authority in that regard has really been significant. It's used particularly in more remote areas, hill walkers and others who go missing, but the use of drones for public safety, for well-being, I think is crucial. And I know that we've had significant deployments in all parts of the country. I think almost 100 since the start of this financial year, and the vast majority of those will be in regard to missing persons. So it's something we'll continue to use. It's the right thing to do to keep people safe, but the focus on missing persons is an absolute key one. In terms of the Drugs Death Task Force, I did, like all colleagues, note the change of leadership at the time, and again we thank the outgoing chair and vice chair for their work. Our commitment hasn't altered to that drug test task force. We are heavily involved in it. ACC Gary Ritchie is a member of that. I think he either met with the new chair and the minister yesterday. I know that there's regular dialogue in that regard. And in terms of some of the specific work, if I may, I would perhaps invite Deputy Chief Constable Will Kerr, who obviously works very closely and with Gary and his team, maybe just to say a little bit more and perhaps touch upon specifically the issue of naloxone that you rightly raised, Tom.
Thank you.
Thanks,
DCC Kerr.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just the Chief covered most of it. I'll not add an awful lot in, but as I said, ACC Ritchie has been meeting in the past few days, the Drugs Minister. Enforcement clearly plays a massive role when it comes to tackling drugs in Scottish society. It's a role that we take very seriously. The very significant recent seizures of drugs give a sense of the amount of operational focus and priority we give to that area. But there's no easier unilateral policing solution to something that's a far wider issue across Scottish society, and it's one of those issues, as all board members will be aware, where health, wealth, and crime all converge. Actually, so that whilst we will of course engage in robust enforcement, that is the job of policing, we're also involved through the Drugs Death Task Force and one of its subcommittees, which is the Criminal Justice and Law subgroup, looking at a range of projects to try and get the best use of all public services and third sector organisations across Scotland to try and tackle this problem effectively. So just to give you a couple of brief examples, the tackling stigma, because obviously whilst we'll do robust enforcement, we want to make sure that people who are struggling with an alcohol or a drug addiction are treated in line with our values. That's incredibly important for policing in terms of our code of ethics and our engagement and relationship with citizens across Scotland. There's also a thing called the Pathfinder Project. Again, it's been led by a subgroup of the Drug Death Task Force. It's looking to try and maximise opportunities to get people into treatment programmes as early as possible in the criminal justice process, so that people don't unnecessarily end up in prison without an opportunity, and prisons are already full enough without an opportunity to try and get them engaged in meaningful treatment programmes. That's actually been rolled out in Inverness as a pilot area, and it's due to potentially move to Dundee and South Lanarkshire later on in 2022. The only other thing I was going to briefly mention, just to give you a sense of a scale around missing persons, that you've talked about this earlier, but just in relation to Mr. Halpern's question, to give a sense of scale and the amount of time and effort we put into this area. I mean, every missing person obviously is a matter of grave concern for Police Scotland. It's a clear operational focus and priority for us, as the Chief Constable alluded to, including his personal attention. But last year, in the 2021 reporting year, with just over 14,000, it was 14,370 reports of missing people. 99% of those are traced safe and well, but actually the reason we take them all seriously is 56% of those were children and young people aged from 10 to 19. 23% of those were missing from young persons accommodation. It's something we cannot afford to take any chances with. But actually, it's not just the growth of missing persons. It's, as we've discussed a number of times over recent years with the authority, it's what we designate as concern for person. It's additional calls, particularly with people who are maybe undergoing a mental health crisis, who they can't get hold of any other public service, and they contact the police service, particularly out of hours. We're one of the few accessible public services. That takes up a vast amount of time and effort on behalf of policing. Very often we're not the most professionally qualified to go, but police officers, because it's ingrained within police officers and all of us, will always want to go and help somebody who's undergone a bit of a significant crisis. You also asked just very briefly on naloxone. Yes, we're the test of change, you'll be aware at the moment, has been introduced into 3 test bed areas. We're doing Glasgow East, Dundee City and Forth Valley. We've used it during the test of change, albeit we've used it a few times afterwards, 51 times. There's no doubt that life has been saved. During the naloxone test of change, of 806 officers who've attended the training inputs. 656 officers are opted to take part, and then there'll be a review at the end of this, which will go to an independent evaluation team, and a full report will be submitted at the end of this month, which will go to the chief, and then there'll be a decision made as to the next steps. But like everything else, we're always prepared to take and involve ourselves in any programme that positively deals with tackling this significant ongoing issue of drugs within the Scottish society, but also reflects the core role of policing, which is to save life and the preservation of life. So it's something we'll never walk away from. So stop at that point. Thank you for your time in answering.
Thank you, DCC Kerr. Can I come to Mary Casey and then Alistair Hay, please? Mary first.
So, thank you very much, Chair. Chief Constable, my question's about road safety. You have a reference to that in your report, a couple of very successful campaigns, but you've also just reiterated your own commitment to ensuring that drivers who endanger other road users will be brought to justice. There was a documentary earlier this week which suggested that across the UK, a number of forces have had to make very significant cuts in their roads policing capacity. And I wondered if you could confirm what the position is in Police Scotland.
Thanks for that, Mary. I'll maybe ask DCC Graham to make some comments on this. I just have a couple of observations. I did see that panorama programme. You know, a lot of it was focused on policing in England and Wales and the implications of that, the 43 forces, how to police a motorway network or a road network that crisscrosses all different areas. And I do think that is a challenge. We have not made those cutbacks in our road policing capability. I would say, I don't have the specific figure, but I can make them available. But if anything, when we deployed our road policing officers across Scotland, we have more road policing officers deployed in more rural areas now, because we look at the road networks, because we've created hubs at Fort William and elsewhere, and we've got the flexibility to deploy right across the area. As you would know from your own professional experience, you know, you could take a 20-minute drive under legacy arrangements and crisscross 3, 4, 5 police force areas, and that caused a lot of difficulty. We're now operating as a single entity. It's allowed us to police the roads effectively. We're working with partners to long-term targets around about killed and seriously injured. The longitudinal direction is really an improving picture in Scotland. It's an area of real concern. There remain high-profile roads because of their shape, because of the geography, because of a whole host of factors, not least of all weather at times, that there do remain higher levels of casualties than any of us would wish. But road policing in Scotland is a high priority. We've got a dedicated department. It's led by a dedicated Chief Superintendent, Louise Blakelock, who was honoured in the New Year's Honours list. And it remains an area of significance. Again, it's an area I look at very, very closely at my operational review meetings on a daily basis. But Malcolm, I wonder if you maybe wish to add a little bit more detail to my remarks.
Thank you, Chief Constable. Thanks, Mary, for the question. I mean, I'll start off repeating what the Chief Constable said. The assertions in the Panorama programme were unfortunately inaccurate on two main fronts. Firstly, there's been sustained casualty reduction. The number of fatalities in Scotland in 2016-17 was 149. The 5-year average now sits at 138. In 1920, there were 128 fatalities, and last year there were 92. Now, we would accept that last year was perhaps anomalous because the volume of traffic on the roads through the pandemic and various lockdowns probably gives a falsely low figure, and that's likely to rise again. But there's a sustained trajectory of a downward trend. And if you look over a longer period back to 1995, all traffic on the roads has risen by over 30% in that period of time, and accidents or collisions overall have reduced by 64%. And in fact, the only category of road casualties which has increased very slightly in recent times has been pedal cycles. And there's been an explosion of people cycling on the roads, which is a very positive thing and that's only risen in the course of the last year by 2%, and some of that may be connected to the pandemic as well. In relation to the numbers and spread of specialist roads policing officers, again, going back to the Chief Constable's comments, when Police Scotland started, we had 596 roads policing officers in Scotland, and that's the number that we have today. Now, the way in which those officers have been deployed has changed slightly. Originally, there was a greater focus into urban centres, and that has changed as we've got a better understanding of both tactics and techniques to target dangerous driving and to improve safety, and also, as the Chief said, to cover the trunk road network in a way that's easier to do as a national service. So, you know, to summarise, unfortunately, some false assertions in that television programme, but I think the commitment to road safety is really clear. Our interagency working, the work that we've done more recently around about drug driving, and the sustained commitment of resource in terms of capacity, but also the capabilities of those officers is exceptional.
Thank you very much for that. I'm sure that's provided reassurance to the authority, but also to the public. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mary. I've got Alistair Hay, then Katharina Casper. Alistair first.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you for your report, Chief Constable. I think it did give a demonstration of the breadth, depth and complexity of policing within Scotland. There's a couple of areas that I would just like to touch on. It's continuing that discussion on road safety, and I was interested that you highlighted the Drive Insured campaign. And I wonder if you could just expand on that slightly, because obviously you can't tax your car without it being insured, and everything's gone online, you know, which you would hope would make things easier to detect those that are driving illegally. But I don't know. Could you expand on that a little bit, please? And the other one is mental health at work. You touch on that, and undoubtedly, you know, policing and working, as you allude to in your report, within the wider emergency services is difficult, and it can have an impact on people's mental health. And we've been working in extremely challenging times around COVID, where for everybody mental health has become a big question. Could you just expand on the work that Police Scotland are doing there, you know, to support staff and the wider community?
Thank you, Alistair. I'll ask Malcolm in a minute, if I may, just to comment on the work we're doing about those driving without insurance, who, again, are people who are acting recklessly, are people acting without consideration, because it clearly potentially leaves other people being vulnerable, as well as clearly being in breach of the law. The pressures of mental health and mental well-being, I think, is something that, you know, policing is, keep saying policing is the public are the police. You know, we reflect the society that we're part of, and our culture is often reflective of that as well. I think right across the world, but perhaps particularly in a country like Scotland, where we're not necessarily encouraged to express our feelings, our thoughts, or perhaps even to show some vulnerability. I think over the years that has definitely been the case. You know, I'm in my 30th year of policing, and you know, the thought that you come back from a critical incident, a fatality, a child death, a very violent murder scene or violence, or a fatality on the road, all of which that we've all attended as operational officers, and say, oh, I'm struggling, or I can't do that. You wouldn't have done it, because actually, you know, you wouldn't have, you would have been demeaned within the culture wrongly, and actually, you know, potentially you might not necessarily be part of the next squad that you would want to be part of as you go on. So that was the culture, and I don't think policing was unique in that regard. And there was a lot of things were done through other mechanisms, and it was, you know, quite literally cliches such as, you know, going for a couple of drinks after work, etc. All things that we know now would only add to the mental pressures. So culturally, I think there's been a big change over the last 10 years, but probably more, more acutely in the last 2 to 5 years. So we do encourage people to come forward. We put mechanisms in place. We train our first line managers, our sergeants, our leaders to look for signs. We have well-being. It was a big part when I became chief, Alistair. I really wanted to push our approach to well-being to the forefront of what we've done, because I was part of the service in the early years, but we didn't look after our people in the way we wanted to or should have. But we created that. We've now got a wellbeing department. We've recruited a recent leader into that role to re-energise it. We've got an employee assistance programme that can access all levels of assistant networks. We've got wellbeing champions who are operational officers and staff embedded in teams that it's that sense of they might not know the answer to your problem, but they can navigate, they can point you to a source that can assist you with that. So we've got a lot of formal mechanisms, and we've got a lot of issues, I think, about the culture of the organisation to encourage people to seek that support and to support each other and to know that it's actually a sign of strength, not to be okay. So a long way to go. But the culture has significantly changed, and we've got an enormous amount of mechanisms that we have in place, and happy to report back specifically on that. And I know with Mary and her people committee, it's something that they look at regularly through Fiona Taylor's leadership. Thanks, Alistair.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I got Katharina Casper and then Paul Eadie. Katharina.
Forgive me, Chair.
Sorry, Chair. I've got a second question.
Oh, sorry, Alistair.
I don't think I covered. I deliberately didn't cover the insurance point, and again, maybe if with your support, just invite DCC Graham to address that.
Yeah, thanks, Chief and Chair. I'll keep it fairly brief. It's an excellent example of an innovative, collaborative approach between policing and private sector and government, and it's exactly the point you raised, Alistair, that actually it's because all of these records are now maintained online. The linkage between vehicle registrations, DVLA and insurance allows the organisations who insure people to be far better sighted when insurance is not renewed or in place round about a vehicle. And through this collaboration, we can be notified of when that's the case and vehicles are in use. And then we can target our attention towards those people that are using the roads without insurance, with a relatively small investment from us in terms of people to collate and analyse that information. Now, the benefit of that is that we know there's a really strong correlation between people who don't insure their cars and who will commit other crimes and offences, including those on the roads, but not confined to those on the roads, that are going to make the roads less safe for other people to be on. So it's a really good example of us being able to focus our limited resource where there's greatest risk, and there being really good impact and demonstration of that throughout this. And I think it's something that we'll look to try and expand as we go forward, because it's been so successful in its early period. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. My apologies, Alistair, for cutting off that second half of your question. I'm going to come to Katharina Casper and then Paul Eadie. Katharina.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. My question is related to road safety as well, which seems to be the flavour of the day. And specifically the festive drink and drug driving campaign. So again, I note that it obviously has been a substantial effort, and it seems like it has been quite successful in terms of the detection rates as well. So I was wondering, I've got two questions. I mean, firstly, I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate if you're seeing any trends in terms of the ratio between drink and drugs, if there is, for example, an increase in drugs offences that you're seeing. So interested in that. And secondly, I am wondering, how does this substantial detection success translate into getting our roads safer? So, how quickly and effectively can these offenders be taken off Scotland's roads? So I would really appreciate your view on that.
Thank you, Katharina. A couple of overall observations, if I may. Culturally, I think this is an area again where at times I've heard people being cynical about some of the campaigns that we in policing launch, or that we work with colleagues. This is an area where I think it shows the value and it shows the worth of consistently stating a public message and asking for the public to support that, and will affect people's behaviours and actually people's values. So again, if you go back 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, if you were caught drink driving, it was almost seen as that you were unlucky, or that the police or somebody had phoned the police because you were leaving the pub, or you were leaving a restaurant. Now I think that there is widespread social condemnation of anybody who goes behind the wheel and drives after drinking or taking drugs. And that's massively been a part of the campaign. It's affected how people view this particular behaviour. I would say wearing a seatbelt is something similar. So again, I'm going to invite Malcolm to say a couple of comments, but just a couple of things that I may say. That the reason that Malcolm gave those figures about how effective we in Scotland have been, and it's not just to do with policing. This is why the Panorama programme was so wrong. There are so many factors, but we have a big role to play in it. So we don't claim to be the sole cause of the significant trajectory reduction over the last decades in terms of those killed and seriously injured on the roads, but we've got a big factor to play in it, because we know that speeding, we know that people not wearing seatbelts, we know that people who drive when they've taken drink or drugs actually has an effect on people being killed and seriously injured. So therefore, that's why we target those that carry out those offences, and the evidence of that, the outcomes. We hear a lot from the Scottish Government and others about outcome-based. Well, actually, the outcomes of our police activity and our contribution is this trajectory that Malcolm described, that we need to keep hammering hard to make sure that we continue to reduce those people who are killed or seriously injured on the roads. How quickly they come to justice is a matter of the effectiveness and efficiency and speed of the criminal justice system is affected at the moment because of COVID. We know court times and lots of pressures, but we're continuing to work with colleagues to ensure that justice delayed is justice denied, and that we can make sure that people are held to account in an appropriate manner in an independent court of law as quickly as possible. I'll maybe ask Malcolm just that question on ratios, an interesting one. Katerina, I think undoubtedly we know that even generationally there's less alcohol consumption amongst younger generation, but perhaps greater use of drugs, both legal and illegal. Either way, anything that causes impairment means that you shouldn't be driving a car. Malcolm?
Thanks, Chief, and thanks, Katrina, for the questions. I mean, it's a fascinating area in terms of how it's developed in a relatively short space of time. It's only since 2019, October 2019, that the drug driving legislation was implemented, and we welcomed that. But it has meant that I think we've seen the true scale of the picture for the first time, because we've got the ability to do roadside testing that we didn't previously have. And prior to that, we were reliant on different legislation which required us to try and assess impairment effectively through a series of tests, which is actually very difficult to do and challenging to evidence if it wasn't excessive. I think in relation to the Christmas campaign, it's really positive in some respects that there's a higher rate of positivity around about drink driving, but of course it is still disappointing that with such a campaign we can still find so many people who are drink driving, and the drug driving figures continue to rise. And that's got to be subject to further education and awareness raising. We're doing some specific work at the moment around about those in communities who are drug dependent, because the evidence shows that that's a large part of what we're finding. And of course that then links into, as the Chief Constable's mentioned, the prevalence and acceptability of drug use in wider society, and how that plays through into younger people who are coming into becoming road users. Very different picture than perhaps the drink driving picture, which has reduced over time. In relation to the deterrent effect and the timeliness of us managing to get people off the roads if they are making it unsafe for others, there are some capacity issues in the system through SPA forensics that we're exploring jointly with the SPA and the Scottish Government to ensure that we build the capacity that we need to ensure that we can get these samples tested and get through the criminal justice system as quickly as both the police and SPA forensics can be responsible for But of course, some of these cases have been subject of the well-rehearsed and publicised delays that we're seeing as a result of the pandemic into the court system as well, and rightly that should be of concern. There are three basic approaches to road safety, the three E's: education, engineering and enforcement. And we push really hard, particularly on education and enforcement. And engineering, we're a key part of offering that advice in multi-agency partnerships, both nationally and locally, to where safety can be engineered into the road safety network. And we continue to do that and with all the evidence that we have of these emergent issues, and we will, for the reasons that the Chief Constable said, continue to do that into the future.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to move on to the next two questions, first from Paul Eadie and then Tom Halpin. Paul.
Yes, good morning, Chief Constable and board members. I've got a couple of areas I wanted to ask questions on. The first is in your report, Chief Constable, about local government engagement. And as you know, I'm passionate about this. And I wonder if there are any big ticket strategic issues that you can maybe share with us from the discussions that you had with COSLA, particularly coming from the councils.
Morning, Paul, and thanks for that. Kerr leads very strongly on our relationships with local authorities, the formal structures through SOLAS and COSLA, but also just in terms of local relationships with each council and the officials in each council. A couple of observations from me, if I may. I said in response to Alistair's query around about mental health and well-being that, you know, as a member of the senior leadership team since 2012, you know, I do reflect on the progress that we've made, or some of the learning, or some of the mistakes, for want of a better phrase, that were made along the way, and that I was part of. And undoubtedly in the early years, a lot of focus on structure, process, procedure over people and well-being, and that's why we've had to make this significant investment we've been making now, and will continue to make. But another area that I would reflect upon was a lack of strategic engagement with local government. You will know as well as I better, Paul, about some of the debates and the discussions at the time about whether, you know, was this centralisation, was this a diminishing of the influence and role of local government, and as a result, did this diminish the relationship between the police and local communities? And I do think in the early years we did not give enough attention to our relationship with local government. It was ad hoc at a strategic level. There was good practice. There were some legacy arrangements and structures and personal relationships that sustained and were maintained. But actually, it wasn't addressed in a formal mechanism. The relationship between the police authority and local scrutiny boards, the relationship between Police Scotland and local scrutiny boards was diverse, and we've taken a number of steps to address them, and we've got a number of plans actually in the forthcoming year that again Will might outline. So that's, I think, the first point. I actually recognise that there was an underinvestment in this area, and I think we have absolutely got that commitment to address that, and I think we've got some tangible evidence that we are addressing it. The second point I would make is that the experience of the pandemic has showed the criticality of local relationships and local services. I often say to key colleagues in local government, people in Mary's role in the past, that, you know, we are charged with providing actual services to actual people in communities, whether that's through the work of local resilience partnerships at time of acute need, whether it's through other times where the emergency services, all of it, you know, working very closely with local services and local government, looking at safeguarding and looking at health and social care. You know, those relationships have been really, really intense. I mean, daily contact with senior colleagues in local government at national and local level. So I think the pandemic has, you know, one would never have sought it, but it's actually been a driver to really getting us integrated in terms of purpose and re-establishing a lot of those strategic relationships that maybe we had not invested enough time on in the early years, as I said. So just a couple of opening comments, Paul, and then I'll maybe ask Will to add to that, because Will's led a really significant amount of progress since he joined Police Scotland. Will?
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, I'm not rehearse everything the Chief has said, Paul. I mean, the relationship 3 years ago just wasn't as good as it should have been. It was fairly disaggregated, I have to say, good in parts, not so good in others, wasn't proactive from our perspective. So what we've tried to do is build up multiple but complementary tiers of engagement with local authorities, both just local government chief executives through Solace and COSLA, but equally through the scrutiny panels and scrutiny committees, so that we had this appropriate balance of both formal and informal engagement, because you pick up actually really important information and feedback from both, and we need to do both. So what we've done over the last couple of years, we've got regular, obviously twice yearly meetings with the scrutiny conveners that the chair and I go to. The chair and I have also complemented that with a series of bespoke briefings to scrutiny conveners and council chief executives, things like body-worn videos, drones, other issues that are public import and public interest. Those have actually worked very well. We've had really useful feedback for those. But also I now chair every 3 months with the, as is now Andrew Kerr, the current chair of Solace, a meeting with chief executives and senior police officers in Police Scotland to look at, we pick a strategic and a tactical theme for every meeting, just to make sure that we're actually, so UNCRC preparations, whether it's about COP26 learning, how we police our way out of the pandemic. We will also look at the last meeting road safety issues and a range of other things. We're also maturing our approach to community surveying, because that's really important in terms of our relationship with local communities and local government as well. So the latest iteration, and you would have seen this on Monday, of the Your Police survey with about 36,000 responses in that last year, but we're constantly trying to mature how we use it. So we've, as well as asking what's important to local communities and our local government partners, we're also trying to find out through an additional geospatial function on that Your Police survey where they feel less safe in their communities. And that becomes very relevant when we come to talk later on Malcolm's paper about violence against women and girls. That sort of dynamic assessment of community feelings of safety, self-identity, public space management is where we've been increasingly over the last couple of years working incredibly closely with local government to make sure that we put all of our public assets into the places that communities expect us. So I hope in part, and I'll tell you the key issue that came out, is I hope in part the explanation goes to the premise of your question, which is like every other public service, we know we can improve, but you can only improve if you ask in multiple ways and at multiple times what we can get better. And that's been really important for us. I think the key issue for us, though, in our engagement with local authorities, and it's quite similar, I have to say, to local government, you know, the assessment and confidence in public services is very often based on what people can publicly see. It's about visible, overt assets and responsibilities. And we're quite similar to local government in that respect. And what we found is that whilst the importance of the basics, accessibility, visibility remains extant, and that's why we invest so much time and effort, even with an analogue IT system and C3 in our contact management centres, we've actually found that a significant and a growing part of our conversation with local authorities and scrutiny conveners is around the fact that the frontline vector of policing in 2021 is now much wider than it was even 5 years ago. So it's not just about public space management now and how we engage with key partners, including local government. It's about how we manage private space and how we manage the digital space. And we've just got to get smarter as to how we work with key partners and keeping citizens safe from the range of threats and harms that they face in those areas. So as the chair knows, we have a programme that's going out, COVID dependent, over the course of the next 6 months, not including the PERDA period, obviously in the run-up to local government elections in May, to try and have that conversation with local government partners and particularly with scrutiny panel conveners and committee conveners to say, look, the local policing plan review that we did jointly with the SPA over the last couple of months highlighted that point in particular. It's about how do you get the best balance between localism and making sure that we reflect what citizens continue to tell us are important to them locally, ASB, dealing with drugs, dealing with public protection issues, dealing with road safety issues, but all the stuff that our operational expertise and data and intelligence tells us that actually the public are very unsafe, even particularly within their own homes, and certainly in terms of cyber threat when they're digitally living their lives increasingly online. And that's the space where I think that partnership with COSLA and Solace is going to be increasingly valuable, because we're spending an increasing percentage of our time and proportion of our time speaking about how we manage that, not over public space together, far better coordination and collaboration and data sharing, joint use of public assets, but how we manage that private and digital space. And that's why I think we've been trying to push a lot of the conversations over the course of the last few months. So I hope that gives you at least a sense of what we're doing in that space, but the relationship is fundamentally different.
It certainly does. And the thing about it is that partnership is greater than the sum of its parts. And often I see across public sectors, people forget local government, and local government for police services are a phenomenally rich source of intelligence and phenomenally important partner in terms of service delivery and making people feel safe, because they're out there all the time. So no, that's been really helpful. The second topic I wanted to ask about, and I've got a short sequence of questions on this, is the pandemic and Omicron in particular. And I'm seeing this, I mean, it's cut through the country like a hot knife through butter, but it isn't necessarily about people getting very sick. It's really, the big problem is staff having to isolate and staff getting sick and having to stay off work. And I know that my colleagues in the health and social care sector are predicting the next fortnight as being particularly tough. Now, it's a different dynamic for Police Scotland. Are you expecting that to be replicated, or largely are you over the peak in terms of operationally?
Thanks, Paul. I mean, I was going to say, in essence, we don't know. You know, we've got some projections. What we do know is that our absences are beginning to reduce. I updated in my written report and my comments some of the steps we took. These were all decisions and discussions that we were taking on right over Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, right across it between myself and the senior team. Malcolm as the Tala Gold, and the steps we take to increase capacity at the front end, such as interfering with the probationers going through their training programme, taking officers away from core functions, whether that's in some of the change programmes or whether it's in some of the specialist support, so detectives who would be carrying out surveillance against organised crime and others, that we're asking them, because of the impact we had on absences and what we projected would arise. We had to take these decisions in a timeless manner to give people notice, to put the logistics into place, so that we can now deploy as we are doing. And that continues, and that will continue certainly through until February, where again we will have to see the full impact. But we've been working extremely hard to try and assess the data, look at the demands upon us. At the moment, most of our pressures are, if you like, internal. It's not necessarily that there's no enforcement requirement as things currently stand. We continue to provide reassurance, we can continue to support the public, but most of the demands have been the pressures on our own workforce. C3, you know, where you're indoors, you're working closely with people, and often it's through isolation caused by family members and whatnot that caused the pressure. So we've taken steps. I'm hopeful that we are over the peak of our absences, but again, you know, time will tell. But I think we've got contingency, we've made contingency plans, we've altered our deployment at speed, and we will do so again if further demands arise. But Malcolm, again, just as you're in your role as Gold Commander for Operation Tala, is there anything you wish to add in response to Paul's question?
Thanks, Chief. I think there's very little to add to that. We have in place a structure that on a daily basis identifies where gaps arise, because the dynamic nature of absence and peaks and outbreaks means that it doesn't happen in a homogenous way across the organisation. So you might be running with you know, an 8, a 9, a 10% absence rate, but that's not 8, 9, 10% in each station or each area. You'll have a shift or a station disproportionately affected whilst there's no impact in another area of the country. The arrangements we've put in place allow us to dynamically deploy officers into those gaps for a day shift, for a back shift, for a night shift, on a 24/7 basis to make sure we can cover them, whilst we're looking at the slightly medium and longer term picture in terms of where we mobilise resource from to ensure that we've got that pipeline of contingency in place. And as the Chief said, the absence levels are reducing at the moment, but we can only go on the data and projections with some heavy caveats and some pretty broad parameters in terms of their accuracy that were provided by the governments and Public Health Scotland. So, I think we stand ready to respond as we have done through the course of the last 2 years.
So on the basis of that, you're not going to be able to tell us when you reckon that C3 in particular will be back to normal in terms of staffing levels and performance?
Well, I think the performance, Paul, has been really strong, and because of the steps we've taken. So C3, I think that the performance has been strong. That's enormous credit to the officers and staff within C3 in terms of working practices, but also it's a credit to the flexibility of the organisation, because we've prioritised ensuring that C3 retained and has the resources in its place in place. And I think, again, talk about outcomes, I do think that the response and the summary I provided in my report on the timeliness of our 999 and 101s vindicates that. But I hope, my hope to be really candid is that by the end of February, all officers and staff are back to their base post, that we're operating in an operating environment that allows us to maximise our effectiveness and efficiency, and then we can drive on the important changes that we need to make, such as the introduction of UCCP and other areas to continue to develop the service. It's been really difficult to try and make some of the changes while at the same time dealing with a pandemic, but again, massive credit to those involved. So I'm hopeful that once we get into March, Paul, it'll look more like normality. But I do think it's credit to the officers and staff in C3 that we've managed to maintain the performance that is evident.
And there's been no detrimental impact on response times to 999 calls? The officers.
I don't have that. Okay. I don't have that figure in terms of officers deployed to the scene. In general terms, I don't think so, Paul. But again, I don't know if Will can add something on that.
Yeah, I can. Just to give you a wee bit of assurance, Paul, you're right that our performance levels, not just in C3, but also our deployability and response times to the public has been increasingly important. And as the Chief talked about earlier on, that's why we took over 600 officers from middle and back office and other specialist and nationalist functions and just pushed them out into local divisions to make sure that there wasn't actually any detrimental impact in response times. And as you know, we've got those 4 categories of call. We take a far less binary and linear approach than we did in the past because CAM, the contact assessment model, was about a cultural shift in policing, making sure that we give members of the public who call in a service and a response and an attempt to resolve their call that's actually bespoke to them, not just a computer says you need to get A, B and C. So those 4 levels of deployment, an immediate call within 15 minutes, a prompt which is within 4 hours, either a scheduled call, which is a diary call, or the resolved by the deployment team. It's really important to us that we actually follow through on what we've told the member of the public we're going to do, and we stick to those timeframes that we've told them after we've categorised the call. Now, the figures are still very high, and over 95% of cases within C3, we are actually doing what we told the member of the public that we would do. In the small number of cases where we're not, it's simply because we've had to prioritise or reprioritise. So if something more important comes in, if there's a 999 call comes in, we'll always prioritise that. If there's an emergency or there's a public safety risk or a citizen's at risk of harm, we'll always prioritise that. But that over 95% hopefully gives you some assurance that even with an analogue IT system, and as the Chief mentioned earlier on, UCCP, the Unified Communications and Collaboration Platform, that's really the first time since about 2013 that actually we've been able to invest in an analogue IT infrastructure in our C3 contact management centres. And the money that we've spent in it over the last 8-9 years has really been about maintaining and patching legacy analogue systems, and even in 2013 it was out of date. So this is about time we're able to invest in some of the infrastructure there. That will make a massive difference to us in terms of C3 performance over the next few years.
Thanks very much for that, Chair.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Paul. The final question I have in front of me is Tom Halpin. Tom.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. I want to touch on the estates and the estate strategy. That we've already heard of the importance, even in the comments regarding COSLA and public confidence in the visible presence of the estates and accessibility. And it's been mentioned before the need to upgrade our estate, and the investments we've heard today have been around electric vehicles and forensics. It's not been as visible about estates at this stage. And along with other members, I had the opportunity to actually physically go into stations during COP26, and to be honest, there was the need for refurbishment in these areas was very, very clear. And given the importance of this, it's just your reflection where we are with the estate strategy. Where's it going? The significance around co-location, collaboration we've talked about here today, and what possible consequences longer term for revenue budget pressures as we become the tenant within that relationship more frequently. That this is a matter of huge importance to staff and police officers who has a direct impact in their sense of being valued, their well-being, etc. It's just important that we heard your reflections in that today. As in the investments we heard about, it actually wasn't so visible about estates.
Thanks, Tom. Again, a really important, significant strategic issue of public interest. So I agree with your comments and your observations. I'll ask the DCO, David Page, to talk around the estate strategy a little bit more. But again, if I may, I'd like to say a couple of comments. As you know, Tom, we inherited a very, very diverse and mixed estate profile from the legacy arrangements and structures, and that continues to this day. You can travel across Scotland and see some of the best public sector estate within Police Scotland. So you can go to Dalmarnock, you can attend at Kitty Brewster in Aberdeen. You can go and look at some quite incredible co-located areas, such as the new office in Peterhead. And what we're looking to achieve in all these diverse areas is exactly that, an operating environment that is effective, efficient, looks after the well-being of officers and staff, that is accessible to the public, and actually, in an ideal world, we are co-located with partners, not because co-location is an end in itself, but that allows us to join up services and put citizens at the forefront. So a citizen who walks into Peterhead, a citizen who walks into Marshall College in Aberdeen immediately has a joint service desk, if you like, as to where their interest requires. And they might come in looking for some assistance from the police service, but actually it might be a related housing issue. And our ideal, our optimum is to make sure that that citizen, that family gets their needs addressed with that level of co-location and collaborative service delivery. So the state strategy, I think, as you're rightly pointing out, is a means to that crucial end. It's not just about buildings, it's about welfare of our people and well-being of our officers and staff, and it's also about making sure we maximise the service that we bring to the public that we serve. So the principles that we've got about working collaboratively is one that holds really, really powerfully. In the last number of weeks, I said I've been in Peterhead, I've been in Aberdeen. I was in Crieff actually just before Christmas as well. We had quite a smaller localised project with colleagues in Perthwick and Ross had been initiated there, again with the same principles, scalable to the demands that we have. But we did inherit an enormous amount of estate. I think when as I recall, I think we occupied about 60 unoccupied buildings when Police Scotland came into being. And since that time, we've worked hard to seek to sell, we've seeked hard to retain capital receipts for further investment. And actually, we did that without actually stepping back and creating this estate strategy that we now have in terms of the purpose and intent and the principles that sit behind it. So I agree with the importance of it. I hope you can hear from my own commitment to it, my own experience of it, that we're driving it. There are some excellent examples what we're seeking to achieve. I would point out the North East Integration project in particular and the outstanding work that's been done up there. But there are pockets and evidence right across the country, but much more to do. And as always, and as ever, we are inhibited by the amount of capital investment that's provided to us by government. And again, that's where I, as chief, to be candid, would be coming back to use the authority to seek your support to underline the need for greater investment and greater support to policing, because of the impact that policing can have on the welfare and well-being of our citizens. David, can you maybe just add a little bit on the estate strategy?
Yeah, thanks, Chief. Happy to do so. I mean, to provide a bit of context, we have to provide condition surveys every 5 years. It's a requirement for the public sector. The last one we did was in 2014-15, where it was about £296 million worth of maintenance that was required over 10 years. We carried out one over 2021, obviously disrupted by COVID. And there's been a lot of movement as a result of the estate strategy since 2014 and 15. We had 468 properties in 2014-15. We've reduced that by 154. And that's to link into our operational policing needs, but also where we've got properties in very poor condition and the balance of investment versus return is dispose it rather than try and fix it. So we've reduced the numbers of the estates. We're down at 314 now. The most recent survey does reflect, and we're grateful for, the additional investment that the Scottish Government has given us. So we have improved the overall condition. As the board's aware, I've been making this statement as the chief over a good number of years now. Our number one priority in terms of investment is on health and safety. We just try and ensure that all of the buildings where our officers, staff and the public go are safe for them to be in. Our overall condition survey result was 69% of our overall estate is deemed as satisfactory. That's an improvement. Effectively last year, in the last survey, 35% of the overall estate was deemed to be below satisfactory. We've improved that. We're down to 13%, but we're still right at the lower end of the overall kind of condition survey parameters. Again, as the chief has said, what we're doing an awful lot of as a result of the estate strategy now is trying to work with partners in local government and other areas, because effectively they have their own pressures. By working together, we can get our officers and get our staff into better premises and reduce our cost burden, because overall, the requirement, the condition survey in 2021 said we need 243 million over the next 10 years. So it's still just under £250 million I need over the next 10 years to bring us up to base satisfactory level for officers and staff. My concern, obviously, is if you look at the Scottish Government's indicative settlements over the next 5 years, it's not enough to bring me up to satisfactory. So we're still going to have a major challenge around ensuring health and safety across all of the estate and ensuring that we try and bring up as far as we possibly can all of our estate to satisfactory, minimum satisfactory contents. It's not where we want to be, but it's the best we can do at the moment. Hopefully that provides a bit of context.
Chair, can I follow up? Thank you. So really just so I understand that, and I understand that it's not an issue that is about policing, it's about public sector across. You see this in other blue light organisations as well, reported in recent media. But to hang it on, I mean, the condition surveys, the priorities, you say quite rightly, are health and safety, but things like decoration might not necessarily be the priority there when you come into that, and those are the conditions that people are working in. And just to hang it out there that you know, a considerable percentage less than satisfactory still exists there. So just to finish, because the risk is here that the workforce and communities, etc., see us as almost going over the top of it with the good stories, and they are really important, and I really commend that. But I don't want to lose sight of that there is a significant area of the estate needs to be brought up to the appropriate standard, and preferably through co-location and shared services for all the collaborative reasons that we've talked about. But those stations that we actually saw for ourselves, where the decorative condition was very much unsatisfactory and some of that those are still priorities that are not less than a simple survey which is based on health and safety.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're working really hard. I mean, we spend a lot of time, and there's been a lot of conversation about kind of well-being, mental health. I mean, operational police officers and operational staff for the last 2 years have been working under the most arduous conditions, and they have to go back. And obviously, we're affected by COVID, and in terms of our cleaning regimes and the like. So not only the infrastructure has to be brought up to satisfactory and health and safety standards, but it's got to be somewhere where it's going to be conducive to operational policing, operating in a very stressful environment. We've got to create space where these people can kind of come back and depressurize. So we're hugely conscious of that, and we have our P&D colleagues and our wellbeing colleagues heavily plugged into our estates planning to try and make sure, it's not just a box. We put them somewhere where they can sit down, they can get access to technology. They're not waiting for 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes after a shift to get onto a bit of technology. All of these things are kind of stress inducers. So we're trying to, with the resources we have, do the best we can.
Thank you, Tom. I got a late question from Jane. I'm trying to wrap this, Jane, so I'll be very grateful. Short.
No, it's a direct follow-up from this last discussion, and I would say partly anecdotally from observation. Don't mind whether you treat it as health and safety, don't mind whether you treat it as service delivery, but the issue of the state of custody suites is a key dimension of the estate strategy, and I just wanted to highlight that, if I may.
Thank you, Jane, and I think that's the estates issue is a shared agenda between the board, of course, and Police Scotland. What David didn't mention there, and which I'm sure he would have done, is the multi-year budgeting ambition that is there to try to deal with some of the annuality. But I would reflect what the Chief Constable and David had said and what Tom says. Estates reflects to the public who don't use police services what the police services is, and any poor quality building reflects poorly on policing, and any poor quality building reflects poorly on the well-being of the people in policing. So I don't think there's any difference between us in terms of its priority at all. We've just got to find ways of both making the case for increased capital, but also showing how effectively we use the capital available. And I talked with my Blue Light Chair colleagues about the shared agenda, which I know David Page has been leading, the co-location, the multi-year budgeting, and the shared capital program. Now, all those things, I know I have briefings from Grant McRae in terms of resources, and he works closely with David Page. So this is a key issue. I mean, all those issues you've mentioned are key. So thank you for all those questions. I just want to reiterate one point, which is the commitment of the SPA to the local government engagement, and DCC-CO and I work very closely on this. We also have failed in the past to be properly respectful and engaging with local government. I'm hoping the energy that everybody's putting in has step changed this in the last year, but they are an enormously valuable partner in all that we do, not least the preventative work, but also the social justice aspect of policing. So thank you very much for that presentation and your time in answering those questions, Chief, and your deputies. Very useful. I hope we've given it the due, but also to reiterate that most of the work of the board, of the authorities within its committees. Now I'm going to take a 5-minute break, if you're okay with that, Deputy Acting Chief Executive of the SPA, before your report. If I can just take 5 minutes and come back to that report for a comfort break, and we'll come back then. Okay, so just switch your cameras off, please. Welcome back, and our next item is agenda item 6 will be presented by Chris Brown, the acting chief executive of the SPA. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I won't talk through the full report, but I would like to draw members' attention to a couple of points and an update on one other which is not included. Firstly, since the last board meeting, the Scottish Government has announced its draft budget for 2022-23. The draft budget for revenue for policing includes a real terms increase, which is to be welcomed and will enable the authority to set a balanced budget for the second successive financial year. However, capital funding continues to be a challenge, with the funding allocated to us some way short of the level required by the multi-year capital strategy set out by CFO James Gray in September of last year. In terms of the next financial year specifically, this shortfall is in the order of £40 million. That's 40. This will, of course, have a significant impact on the pace and scope of capital investment, and Stacey Page alluded earlier to the implications of this on the property estate specifically. Discussions are ongoing with the CFO and his team on how this will be addressed in the draft SPA and Police Scotland budget due to be presented to the authority on the 23rd of March this year. Also in the report itself, I referenced that a 2020 Level 2 intervention from the Scottish Information Commissioner in relation to the authority's compliance with FOI law has been concluded and closed. The improvements are set out in my report, and I can confirm that the authority has responded to all FOI requests within the statutory timeframe during the 2021 calendar year, and we remain committed to the effective and efficient discharge of our FOI duties in the year ahead. There's just one further matter I would like to highlight that isn't in the report itself, and this is in relation to the thematic inspection of the SPA conducted by HMICS in 2019 and published in September of that year. There were 14 recommendations in total, and progress against these has been tracked since then by the Audit, Risk and Assurance Committee. I'm pleased to confirm that at tomorrow's committee meeting, we will hear that all of the recommendations attributed to the SPA, and in some cases jointly owned by Police Scotland too, have now been discharged. I'd like to pass on my sincere thanks to all at the SPA, Police Scotland and indeed HMICS for their contribution towards the achievement of what is, I think, a key and significant milestone. On that, Chair, I will hand back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Are there any questions from board members to the Acting Chief Executive of the SPA? Jane Ryder and then Alistair Hay.
Thank you, Chair. This was less of a question than a comment. I just wanted to draw attention to the Independent Custody Visitor Scheme, the publication of the annual review. We've touched a little on estates and custody, but I was particularly pleased to see that the review was picked up and generated interest in relation particularly to the welfare of children in custody. And I know that's something that the Policing Performance Committee are looking at, and I hope that that report will help to contribute. And the other thing is, because it's not referenced elsewhere, pleased to acknowledge the progress that has been made by the staff in leading a review of an internal improvement plan, what investment we can make to support the visitors and make that scheme even more effective. And indeed, I'm attending one of the virtual regional meetings next Tuesday, but I think we are well on track for a plan with some modest investment in time as much as resource for the next financial year. So I just wanted to draw that to colleagues' attention.
Thank you, Jane. Alistair?
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report, Chris. I'd just like to touch on the Scottish Information Commissioner's Level 2 intervention on FOI. Really pleased to see the response and the improvements that have already been delivered. But in your report, you allude to further improvements in relation to accessibility and disclosure of information planned for this forthcoming year. Could you expand on that a little bit, please?
May I, Chair, just take that one?
Of course, please go ahead. Yeah, just respond.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Alistair. Yeah, so I think very often the content of an FOI is of interest beyond the individual that raises the request. And on that basis, we're planning to publish details of all FOIs received and responded to via a quarterly disclosure log. Not only will this increase transparency, but it should, in theory, avoid duplication and the potential for multiple FOIs asking for essentially the same disclosure. So my understanding is that this is recognised as good practice, and we aim to transition to that arrangement, I think, from April of this year. So this is one of these instances where the same action can address both efficiency and effectiveness, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any other questions to Chris Brown? If there are none, just to thank you, Chris, for your work in the acting capacity, and Barry Sillars, who's jointly acting up as Chief Executive, and for the staff's work on the items that you mentioned. Always very pleased to hear that progress, that positive progress in those areas. So congratulations to them too. We now come on to one of the most substantive items we're going to be discussing in this board. Violence against women and girls. Now, this is already being an issue for the authority through, as we heard earlier on, the Policing Performance Committee. The issue will be taken back up again by a Policing Performance Committee, but this is an opportunity for a board-wide discussion on this issue. So I'm going to invite DCC Malcolm Graham, who I believe is going to be joined by Detective Chief Superintendent Laura McCluskey. So welcome both to you and Malcolm. I wonder if you, when you introduce Laura, you could tell us a little bit about her areas of responsibilities so we understand her relationship to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and I will introduce DCS Laura McCluskey. She is the Detective Chief Superintendent responsible for local crime, and I'll let her say a little bit about what that role entails when I ask her to say a few comments after some hopefully relatively brief opening comments to sort of orientate the report and some of the discussion that you have before you. So thanks first of all for the invitation about this fundamental issue around about equalities, rights, women and girls, and I really welcome the interest of the board and the positive discussion that we had at the Policing Performance Committee in December. The report is comprehensive, and therefore I'll try and keep these comments relatively brief. The first thing I think to emphasise is that Police Scotland, and indeed policing before that, but particularly with the creation of a national service, our history of sustained focus and priority on these issues is extremely high. There's evidence of impact across the formation of the Specialist Crime Division, our focus into local policing through domestic abuse at national, regional and local level, rape and serious sexual crime, child abuse and protection of children, offender management, and more recently, a real upsurge in our response to the increase in online offending. And alongside that, there is evidence of sustained improvement, engagement, building trust with a huge range of other organisations, particularly those that work with survivors and advocate for victims and other justice organisations. And performance is relatively high. There are some figures I'll say a little bit more about and data in the report. We've got much positive feedback, and we've had some really exemplary examples of our public approach to violence against women and girls in the course of some of the challenges of the last year. First of all, in terms of our response to the public concerns following the murder of Sarah Everard and the verification process that we put in place, how that was communicated and received. And following on from that, the next stage of our sustained campaigns focusing these issues onto the responsibility that men need to take through the That Guy campaign, and that will sustain into the future in terms of us ensuring as an organisation we're taking that leadership role. But we're also aware of recent heightened public interest through events and some evidence of practice that's fallen short of our high expectations, policy and good practice, and concerns about sex equality and misogyny issues through behaviours or cases in Police Scotland as well as those beyond. And we need to acknowledge those cases, listen carefully to experiences where it's possible to trace the source of that evidence and make sure that we're acting to improve. And we've done that continually, and there's evidence in more detail in the report, both of our current arrangements and future plans to enhance our ability to do that in the future. We also know that there's a huge amount of data and information available both within policing and beyond, and I want to make better use of that in the future. What we know already is that demands have increased significantly. Reporting and recording are up. Scottish Criminal Justice Survey data would suggest that in the main that's not necessarily as a result of these crimes increasing, but can be attributed at least in part to increased confidence because of the work that we've done. And alongside that, despite these enhanced demands, our detections have increased, and that is a part of the picture, as the Chief Constable said earlier, providing reassurance to victims, not only that we're taking their cases seriously, but that offenders are brought to justice. And the complexity and breadth of these offences has increased substantially as well, not only in each individual case, but in the nature with some of the legislation that's developed rightly to try and tackle new forms of offending and the increase in the risks that are posed in the online environment. It's important, I think, to emphasise, as we have done for some other issues today, that the people in Police Scotland, with their commitment, passion, the human connection that they have to victims, I believe, is extremely high. And through the course, particularly of the stresses and strains of the pandemic and some of the concerns we've had about the particular effect that's had on vulnerable people, I've seen some fantastic examples of that endeavour. And at times working within a strained environment, both in the partnership, capacity and capability, and within our own Police Scotland resource capacity as well. Now, within the report, I speak about the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy, which is building on our approach to public protection. And we want a really specific piece of work that's going to not only link to the formation of an external reference group and a public protection development programme, which will come through that, which we speak about in the report, but we'll make sure that as we go through that work, we engage with all the necessary parts of civic society and some of those organisations I've mentioned in building what a better approach for policing can look like to build on the strengths that we've got. Part of that will be about understanding some of the barriers more comprehensively than we do, understanding the data gaps that are there, and making sure that we have an appropriate model in policing to withstand future challenge and demands that we can anticipate, alongside some clear measures and metrics that will tell us what progress we are making. Prevention needs to be at the heart of that strategy, whilst everything else that the police do is critical. The wider societal issues in violence against women and girls, whether it's through some of the pressures in the justice system, whether it's through attitudes and cultures within wider society, Police Scotland has a leadership role, both in Scotland, but also in the UK in a policing sense. And we're really open to working with a range of different partners and taking this forward in the future as well. Internally, I alluded to some of the equality, diversity and inclusion work the DCC Taylor's been leading, and that was mentioned earlier in the meeting by the Chief. And specifically, we are redoubling our efforts around about sex equality and tackling misogyny. And there's a really strong link towards the confidence that victims and other people in communities should have in policing and our ability to demonstrate that we can create a safe, tolerant and equal environment in terms of our diverse workforce going forward. I suppose finally from me, really grateful for the interest SP. I do think there's a role, not just in relation to having a comprehensive understanding of the challenges set against the ambition that Police Scotland's got in this area, but also to find ways in which the authority can support, look at some of the future likely needs that we will have in terms of investment. And I look forward to bringing that back, hopefully in the future, either through one of the committees or back into the main board as well. If I can pause there and perhaps ask Laura to come in and say a little bit more about her role and provide a little bit of detail on some of the feedback that we've analysed and understood in support of what I've just said. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Chair. Unfortunately, my camera doesn't appear to be switching back on now that I'd switched off from the start of the meeting. So apologies for that. In terms of my role then as a DEP, alluded to, I sit under Specialist Crime Division as Detective Chief Superintendent for Local Crime. My role then is to act as a conduit between SCD and into the 13 territorial divisions, where I have close links with all of the divisional commanders in terms of supporting them in the work in terms of delivering their local policing plans. Each of these divisions has a significant commitment to public protection and violence against women and girls and any form of abuse or exploitation. And as the DEP alluded to, year on year, those demands continue to increase, whether that be through increased reporting of rapes, domestic abuse, child abuse, exploitation, and the online offending that we are seeing. These crimes are increasingly complex, and that can be to do with the non-recent aspect and the volume of care home investigations or children's home investigations are ongoing across the organisation, or indeed through the emerging technology. As members and Chair, you will be aware, in more recent times, an emerging issue of spiking has came to the forefront, and we've had a significant commitment to that as well. The demands and the resources are impacted by any changes in legislation, and of course that's a bit of a hidden demand, as is the victim support and survivor support that we put in place as people navigate through the police processes and the wider criminal justice process. So that provides a bit of a flavour of the increase in the demands. As the DEP said, our officers are completely committed to these investigations, to the survivors and victims, and are very passionate and professional about their approach to these investigations. And that's testament to the performance, which is exceptionally good, despite these increases in demands. There's obviously some performance data within the report, but just to pull out a few highlights. In Q2 so far, we've received 7,519 reports of sexual crime, and that is an increase of 890 crimes from the same period last year, with an increase of 6% in our detection rate. Rapes are increasing, continuing to increase, and hopefully the intense work that we do with partners in terms of feedback and how we approach a rape investigation or a serious sexual crime investigation, it's helping with those increasing detection rates. Online child sexual abuse as well, 1,412 online crimes have been recorded. That's a 12% up, increase in the 5-year mean. So from 2018-19, our referrals sat at 1961. They are now up to 3,111, which has instigated 2,490 suspect investigations and 759 child at risk packages, which in effect is child protection. Since the inception of Police Scotland, these demands continue to increase, and as an organisation, from the Chief Constable and the Executive down to our divisional commanders, they have moved resources into these business areas in order to deal with that demand. That of course means that there is an impact in other areas of policing. However, our commitment to this very important area is clear, and there are plans in place to provide more resources into these critical business areas. As the paper alludes to, there's a public protection development programme up and running, and we're looking to have a whole systems approach and to improve national and local approaches through this. In terms of continuous improvement, that's key for us, and we continue to work with our partners on a daily basis, both at a local level and also at a national level. We're really keen to understand survivor experience and improve services in any way that we can. Rape Crisis Scotland is a key partner in this area, and we work closely with them in terms of independent feedback, the survivor feedback that they receive through their national advocacy project. That feedback is provided and collated both on a national basis, and we look for key themes. The most recent report, I'll just give you a flavour of those themes, was that there was a lack of regular updates by the Sexual Offences Liaison Officer, lack of explanation of the process, lack of emotional intelligence by officers, and criticism around the setting and conditions of the interviews. This feedback is taken very seriously in terms of key themes and improvement action taken as required, both again nationally and locally in relation to that. And if I may, Chair, if you can indulge me for a second, I'd like to just read out some of the direct comments that have came from some of our survivors through Rape Crisis Scotland. The police were fantastic. I'm a huge fan of how they dealt with me. I couldn't have asked for more. The officers have been nice, but I feel I've been left in the dark in regards to any rough idea of timescales for next steps. I feel I've been left to piece together for myself what the process involves, which has been anxiety inducing for me after making such a big decision to report. He came to my house and was there for about 3 hours. He took all the details and then we walked in my garden. He read it all back and made sure it was right. I would like to have had more clarification on what would happen after my statement before I gave it. They didn't tell me that when I gave names, they would then go and contact these people. I wasn't really prepared for that. And the final comment, it has been helpful to hear from the helpline and resources that can help me to understand the legal process. Like an advocacy worker and the survivors YouTube video, it would have been helpful if the police had given me that information. I would have felt less like I needed to make sense of everything myself. So these comments and feedback is absolutely qualitative feedback for ourselves in terms of that continual improvement. And we look to work with Rape Crisis moving forward to improve the question set for that feedback, to ensure that we get as rich data back as possible in order that continual improvement can continue. Obviously, it would be ideal if we were receiving 100% positive feedback, and unfortunately that's not the case. However, that feedback is in the main very, very high, and we will continue to work really closely with Rape Crisis Scotland in order to improve on that position moving forward. It is our aspiration to continue to increase and build on our public confidence, and I'll leave it at that there, Chair, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, DCS. Is there anything you want to say finally, Malcolm? Not finally, but before I hand it out to the members to ask any questions of yourself and DCS?
No, thank you, Chair. I'm conscious that Chief Constable didn't get an opportunity at the start of the item, but he may wish to answer or contribute to some of the questions that are asked as well, I would imagine.
Would you like to make any comment now, Chief Constable, or do you want to wait to answer any questions?
I'll leave it to the members. Chair, I think Malcolm and Laura have provided what is a summary actually of a massive journey that policing's been on over the last number of decades, and also the fact that we are absolutely conscious of what our challenges are. We're looking them square in the eye, and we've got tangible plans to continue to make progress, and we've got good people like Malcolm and Laura and others who are going to lead the work. So happy to pass back to yourself, Chair, and the members.
Thank you very much, Chief Constable. So I'm going to open up the questions. If you could put your hands up, members, if you'd like to ask a question. But I know that Michelle Miller said at the beginning that her committee had discussed this, and I'd like to invite Michelle to open up any questions if she's available.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks both to Malcolm and Laura for actually putting some really helpful meat on the bones, really, of the report. I think that's been really useful. I think what comes across really strongly in the report is an absolute commitment, to tackling this, and that is particularly welcome. I suppose what I'd be interested, though, is a little bit more of the detail that lies behind some of that, which would be quite useful. So, for example, I think at 2.2 there's reference to engagement both internally and externally. looking specifically at addressing the bias in the organisation that you've identified and that others have identified. And I just want, so welcome as that is, I wondered if you could say a little bit about how you're going to go about doing that, and as critically, how you'll measure your progress or your success in relation to that. So that would be one question. Maybe I'll just run a couple of questions and let you answer them in groups, as it were. And the other is at 2.7, where you make reference to significant progress in tackling violence against women and girls. And I realise that that's in preface to your acknowledgement that there's still much more to be done, and that is a very welcome acknowledgement. But I'd just be interested again in a little bit more detail about that significant progress, whether it's in relation to the kind of strategy development and the articulation of the commitment, or whether it's in relation to operational delivery and performance in relation to that. And then at 2.9, you talk about engagement with and consultation with stakeholders. And I just wonder if you could say a little bit more about who those stakeholders are, how you'll go about consulting with them, and how you propose to make decisions around which feedback you would act on. And this links actually to 2.15, where you make reference to a report that includes recommendations. And you say that Police Scotland will take on board some of those recommendations. And again, absolutely welcome that, but just wondering whether or how you differentiate between the recommendations that you're going to take forward and those that maybe you feel that you shouldn't or don't need to, and just to understand that and to look at how you propose to both take those recommendations forward, but also measure the impact and seek further feedback from those stakeholders on their impressions post any improvement work that you carry out. Sorry, I know that that's an awful lot of questions kind of wrapped up into one, but I'm happy to come back to them if I can help at some point.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Maybe I can just take them one by one and ask Malcolm and his team to take them one by one and then come back to you at the end of each one, so we don't lose track of what you're asking, what the response is. So I think the first one, I'll leave it to you, Malcolm, to identify, but I think it's about measuring progress on internal improvement.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Michelle. I think it builds on the conversations that we had during the Policing Performance Committee. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is that we don't have comprehensive answers to all of the questions that you've asked yet. But as you say in the report, there's a clear ambition that these are some areas that we need to move more in towards. So our collection of data and information, our ability to analyse and gain insight from that, and then make sure that we're acting on it. And that important point that I think you made in your second question about it's fine, I suppose, having strategies and plans and clear leadership intentions, but how do you know that that's translating through into consistent action on the ground, on the front line, where it matters, where we're in contact with victims and the community? And that's something that's at the heart of the approach that we've taken and that we're taking. And in relation to the first point about engagement, I think you asked it both about internally and externally. Internally, you know, we need to address a series of issues which we know are pervasive throughout society in terms of sex inequalities and misogynistic attitudes and behaviours. And there are some specific examples of that having happened in policing. And I think it's likely as we go through that work and we're engaging with a variety, not only of external organisations that might be able to support us in that, who are focused on gender equality, and that's at a fairly early stage. But I think it's likely that as we engage with our own people in a more structured and safe way for them, we're likely to hear more of that. And actually, we should encourage that in a constructive and optimistic way, that by seeking to face these things head on, as the Chief Constable said, we get to the heart of what the real nature of the issue is. We get a deep understanding and insight into the experiences, particularly of women in this case, in the organisation, and we demonstrate that we want to not only listen to and hear those views, but we act on that when we hear it. Now, this isn't just about whistleblowing and grievance policy and procedure. There is work ongoing looking at that, and then from a conduct perspective, excuse me, all being led through DCC Taylor's equality, diversity and inclusion work on the back of Dame Eilish Angelini's report, and you discussed that earlier in the meeting. This is also to look at where we can provide an environment for people who may not want to go through those routes, to have their experiences listened to, and to ensure that we can use that as a vehicle to raise awareness, to educate and ensure that there's a more common understanding across a workforce which in the majority of areas is still male dominated, but that balance is changing as well, so that we can ensure that there's a shift not just in behaviours, but in thinking and attitudes, and that's how cultures change. In terms of the external environment, it's probably a different set of stakeholders. We are looking more at how we engage with statutory justice partners, which we've got strong relationships with, but I think the most important part of this is continuing to build on the strong and confident relationships we've got with key organisations like Rape Crisis Scotland, Scottish Women's Aid, and we're increasingly looking at how we ensure that minoritised or other people from communities that are perhaps part protected characteristics, or indeed other seldom heard voices, we can reach out to, and we've got some evidence of the experience that people from those communities will have, on top of perhaps being women, some other issue or characteristic that's going to make their experience and therefore our response required to be different. I'm going to take the second question round about progress. I think the short answer to that is both. We've made a lot of progress in terms of our policy, strategic ambition, direction and planning. We've already heard a little bit about the commitment in terms of resource set against a very finite capacity, both in terms of investment and police officer or staff numbers. But I think that has translated through into operational impact, and we can see that by some of the performance data that we've already spoken about and that the board scrutinised through time, where the level and nature of these crimes is increasing and our detection rates is increasing as well. But of course, performance goes way beyond just detecting an increasing number of crimes, and that goes to the quality of the experience and of the service that we deliver, which we've already spoken about. And finally, I think your third question was about the survivor feedback and your reference to the Rape Crisis Scotland Survivors Report. When that was launched, the Chief Constable met with a group of the survivors and with Rape Crisis Scotland. That, along with the data and insight that Laura gave you, some sort of, I think, more human element of, in terms of these are the actual comments that we're hearing back. The vast majority of that feedback is very positive. Inevitably, in the Rape Crisis Scotland report, there is a flavour of positivity, but there are a number of recommendations about things that we could do better, and they align actually quite closely with some of the feedback that we're getting through that system we have in place. That's why we're setting up an external reference group to try and systemize and further structure how we receive that feedback, how we play it back, and how we put some sort of measures round about our progress and improvement. And that will be a key part of the wider public protection development programme that we've referenced in the report. But there's much more work to do in terms of getting these things set up and into the shape that I think your questions would allude we would all want to get them into. Thanks.
Thanks, Malcolm. I think that's been really helpful, and I'm conscious that other people will want to come back. So just a couple of things. One's a comment, really, which is I really and particularly welcome the link that both you and the Chief Constable have made between external facing service and addressing some of the issues internally. And I think at the Policing Performance Committee, we really only looked at the external facing, but I think in a sense that leaves a gap, really, because there is kind of public awareness around some of the challenges that you faced in terms of that internal culture. and it's a really positive thing to link those two things together and to look at addressing both issues together. So that's particularly welcome. I just have one other question, and it's one of detail really about that. So you make reference, and Laura helpfully made reference to a whole range, and the report makes reference to a whole range of types of abuse and violence. There's I haven't seen anywhere any reference to female genital mutilation, and I'm just wondering whether, well, why that might be. I'm assuming that it isn't excluded from this piece of work, but just given the scale of it, the issue that it is, and the violence that is involved, just to make sure that that doesn't get kind of lost in the broader brush picture. Really, so that was my only other question.
No, thank you, and I can assure you it's certainly not lost. An extremely challenging issue to address in terms of seeking any reporting or even intelligence or information. We've got some really strong, well-established links with partner organisations who work in that space, both at UK and international level. We have had some reports and intelligence, but they're relatively small in number. That's allowed us to take action, to explore them in great depth, and it absolutely is a part of the of both the ambition, but our current work going forward. It's just a particularly difficult and challenging and yet horrendous series of different types of crimes to identify. But I'm really well assured that our approach towards those issues, both locally and nationally, has developed substantially since our understanding of it became much clearer than it would have been a number of years back. I don't know if Laura would be in a position to say a little bit more about the specifics of how some of that's played out nationally and into local policing on the back of that question.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, Michelle. So just in terms of it, perhaps my wording, but when I speak about rape, it's really rape and serious sexual crime. So FGM would absolutely be included within that, Michelle. And there's really specialist support in place because it's such a sensitive, I suppose, approach that we need to a survivor of those types of crime in order to deal with it and have their full confidence in terms of that police investigation. So it absolutely remains a priority for Police Scotland, albeit it's not articulated specifically within the report or certainly my update.
Okay, thanks very much for that. I think that's really helpful.
Thank you. Before I bring Katrina in, can I just press on a little bit on Malcolm or Laura? Give us an outline, if you could, about the quality assurance mechanism, management quality assurance, about officer service standards, because Laura was saying it isn't always at the level you'd like it to be, or your ambition on your strategy. So I imagine Laura is responsible, maybe you can tell me right, for looking at quality assurance and service standards in this very, very challenging area. So I wonder if you could just give the board some indication of the work you undertake in this area.
Yeah, thank you, Martin. It's different in different areas, actually. It's one of the benefits when the Chief Constable was speaking about murder, homicide and unexplained death earlier, and clearly one of the massive benefits that were brought to that has been specialisation. I would say alongside that, the benefits of specialisation into violence against women and girls has been enormous. Part of that is ensuring that every officer and member of staff has got enough knowledge to be able to deal with somebody, whatever route they come into policing, whether in local policing, in C3 or other routes, and linking that, as Michelle said, to some of the Police Scotland people-related issues that we have as well. But a part of it is making sure that we can escalate people and their needs through to those that have specialist knowledge very quickly. In the case of domestic abuse, for instance, we have that three-tiered approach where we have a national domestic abuse task force. They're responsible for conducting some of the higher-end, complex, linked, perhaps historical or non-recent investigations. But we also have a coordination function that's responsible for quality assurance over day-to-day cases, looking in to do reviews over significant cases, and doing some quality assurance dip sampling work into individual case. Now you see with the volume of that work, that's a substantial task. In the case of rape and sexual crime, we have something similar, but we also do more structured and routine reviews of every inquiry. There's a standardised question set that looks at the approach that the officers have taken and correlates with that with some of the external feedback that we're getting as well. But I do think there is more, and we have a similar process in terms of child abuse investigation as well, where we have a national specialist structure geared in a similar way to domestic abuse. I do think there's more we can do in that space, and I think it will be part of the development of the strategy and improvement programme to look at how we can invest a relatively limited analytical resource into directing our assurance efforts where they need to, because quality of service is clearly the area that we're getting feedback about, that in the areas where it does fall short, we know we need to improve.
Thank you very much. Laura, you wanted to come in?
Yes, Chair, if you don't mind, just further to that, I would stress that it's not unusual for the local police and detective superintendents, you know, if there are key themes that are being highlighted through maybe the rape crisis feedback, it wouldn't be unusual for a detective superintendent or indeed a divisional commander to ask for the national team to come in and conduct a bit of an independent review into that specific business area. And that helps to formulate an improvement plan, whether that be training, or actually providing survivor feedback directly to officers, etc. It's a good way of just reinforcing what our standards need to look like and improvements that we need to make.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I could ask you to consider bringing to the next performance committee, which I know is going to be discussing the subject, some of these metrics that you talk about there, about what's going well and what's not going so well from that oversight view. I think that would start to address some of Michelle's issues about it's not the commitment, it's the delivery that's sometimes the challenge. And you are clearly saying you have a very complex system of oversight of delivery. I would like Michelle, the performance committee, just to consider that as part of this, if you wouldn't mind, if you have that data and have that conversation. So I'm going to have Katrina, and then Caroline, and then Grant. So Katrina first, please.
Yes, thank you. A great deal of what I would have wanted to kind of talk about today has already been covered by Michelle's questions and the very full responses you've given. I think what I do want to say is that I really welcome the report on all the activity that's being undertaken by Police Scotland in this area. I'd like to offer my own congratulations to the Scottish Women's Forum for their, their award. That was great to hear. Like, as has already been said, I have absolutely no doubts whatsoever about the very sincere commitment to this this area. And I want to say something about how it is really clear to me. We have had conversations, we've had very in-depth conversations over the last few months on this topic at Policing Performance Committee and in other forums, and it's really clear to me that there is a lot of really hard listening going on, that people are being listened to, and you're taking on board things that are being said. So I don't want to go on. I don't want to repeat things that have been said in other forums. What I would like to kind of ask something around, it has been touched on today. You do talk about this wider social context, and you talk about your really important work with other, stakeholders and professional experts, if you like, in the area. I really welcomed your comments about women who may also have other protected characteristics, and where those protected characteristics may raise barriers effectively to having their voices heard or being able to access some of those services, or even feel confident about approaching the police. So I really welcome all that. You mentioned resources. So I guess what I'm really wondering about is there any, it's so important that the partnership work that you do with non-statutory organisations or local authorities or whatever, that has to be resourced effectively as well. And we know that some of these organisations have been losing resources, if you like. So it's not something that's necessarily within your power to do. But I wondered if you could see any way to kind of levering a bit of focus on supporting some of these organisations getting the resources they need to do the work with you that is so crucial to improvement in this area. I don't think I have anything else that I wanted to say. I am going to look forward to seeing progress in this area and how that really clear commitment does actually roll out in terms of service delivery. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for the comments that you've made that are hugely supportive. Very grateful for that recognition. And in answer to the question, take it on a few fronts, but fairly quickly if I can. You know, some of the other statutory organisations working in this space have of course come under pressure, and that's been exacerbated by the pandemic as well, in terms of the ability of organisations to respond, whether it's local authorities, health boards, you know, capacity diverted into other areas. And as a police service, of course, we've faced those challenges and we've maintained our commitment and resource in public protection and towards violence against women and girls. Of course, alongside the increased level of sort of public interest and I think expectation rightly in this area, we have seen, as I said earlier, I think quite well publicised and rehearsed impact into the justice system and the delays that some of these really serious cases have suffered from. Has clearly had a very significant impact on victims, their well-being and the traumatic position that they already find themselves in. So I think there are different things we can do. I think in terms of supporting some of our partner organisations in the voluntary or third sector, I think those conversations are probably more comprehensive and frequent than they've ever been, and getting an understanding of where the pressures are, even for them to resource some of the feedback activity that we've already got in place has been really acute during the course of the pandemic, and that's ongoing. In relation to the justice system, you know, there's been comprehensive examination of the system in a variety of different ways, and there are answers, there are solutions, there are things that could be done to change some of these really intransigent concerns around about communication, time delay, impact on victims, a victim-focused service, and a lot of that's captured most recently in the Lord Justice Clerk's report examining the prosecution of serious sexual crime, and we're really supportive of the Scottish Government's efforts to get that off the ground. The most significant thing for policing in that is round about visually recorded interviews and being able to use that evidence at the point of commission rather than awaiting for a trial, and the government are hoping to move ahead with that more substantively. We're progressing visually recorded interviews in pilot phase and in the process of evaluating that, so that's moving forward. But there's a whole raft of other recommendations in Lady Dorian's report which will require careful examination by the government and engagement across the whole of the services in this area, and would need legislative change to bring to effect, and we look forward to being a part of that process as well. So I hope that answers some of your question.
Thank you very much. Katrina, did you want to come back?
No, not really. Thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you. If you can put your hand down, that'd be great. Thank you. Caroline Stewart, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, DC Graham, for this report. I've got a couple of questions, but actually I don't know if I've got the second question there because Katrina has just kind of asked it. So, but I don't think you can read this report without being concerned at the rise in the sexual crimes, domestic abuse, online sex abuse, etc. It's hard to sort of tell from the way the figures are laid out on that sort of 5-year rolling average what kind of percentage increase there has been, especially over the lockdown years. And also the increased detection rate. And I wondered if it would be possible for you to give us that. And I'm happy if you can't do that just now to give it sort of by correspondence to the board afterwards. But I think that'd be really useful to see it in a sort of tabular kind of form. And my second question was really related to, I'm going to ask it anyway, related to the local partnerships. I mean, DCC Care talked about them earlier and you've talked about them as well. But now I'm very struck by the sort of 220 in excess of child murders that we're seeing sort of through the lockdown are starting to come to court now across the UK. And I just wondered, in terms of that local working, I'm just wondering what happens if you get reports of concern regarding vulnerable children or indeed adults, and how that's handed off locally in the local areas? Thanks very much. And also, do you think there's any gaps and how they could be addressed? Sorry, should have asked that. Thank you.
No, thanks very much, and would certainly share your concerns about the increase in online offending. I think that's a real increase. You know, I mentioned earlier that a lot of the increase we've seen in reporting and therefore recording of serious sexual crime and rape, I think because we compare it with other survey data, we can attribute a lot of the increase to either improvements in recording practices over the years, which is necessary, or increased confidence in victims, often through the support and advocacy organisations that we work with, to come forward and report the crimes that have happened to them. And of course, an element of that is non-recent and linked into things like the Scottish Child Abuse public inquiry that's still running. So I think the increase in online crime is real. We are finding better ways to identify and to record that, but the pandemic has undoubtedly accelerated that increase as well, and we equally are concerned about it. In terms of data, I wonder if I could suggest bringing that back to the Policing Performance Committee as well, more comprehensively. And of course, we're linking this work very closely with the cyber strategy implementation programme, which I know you're very well aware of, Caroline, and other members are well cited in our ambition in that area as well. About the local working and identification, I wonder if I could pass to Laura to cover that question, and also if there's any gaps that we perceive as well. Thank you.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, Caroline. So just in terms of, we've got a robust system in place in terms of the vulnerable persons database, if you're not already aware of that. So when our local officers are attending any calls, if they have any concerns that are raised either for child protection or adult protection, then they will arrange for a vulnerable persons database entry to be submitted. That then is assessed through what's called the Concern Hub. And that's when information is shared with relevant partners, and a plan of action is decided upon at that stage. It's generally a multi-agency decision at that point in terms of how we're going to take that forward in terms of those concerns. And it might be, for example, for a child protection issue, that actually social work would go out and do a family visit to start off with. If they establish criminality, then the police then become involved. So there's no kind of one answer for this, if you like. It's really on a case-by-case basis, and dependent on what those concerns look like, will depend on which agency is probably best to deal with. But those concerns can come in, from an ordinary member of the public. They can also quite often come in from education, social work, a variety of different agencies, but everyone is triaged, assessed, and taken seriously in terms of what that process looks like. It's been reviewed a number of times. That's not to say that it can't always be improved upon, and it's we sit with our partner agencies in terms of that decision making and hopefully get it right, but that's not to say that we always get it right, and thereafter obviously there's significant case reviews or can be brought into play in order as an independent review on those cases that as a multi-agency group that were falling short of what was expected.
Sure. And how do those reviews, are they happening on a case-by-case basis, or is it a sort of annual review to see if there's any lessons that could be built into the model for the next year, or how does that kind of review process kind of work, I suppose?
It happens, Caroline, on a case-by-case basis. Right. However, we do have the national teams as well, so that learning then is captured nationally and can be used to enhance any training for officers, for any specialist roles, etc. And obviously, Care Inspectorate, for example, will come out and do their inspections, so there'll be some learning undoubtedly that comes out of every single inspection. So there are improvement plans that are put in place across divisions, depending on where that learning comes from and is acted upon. But nationally, then that information is all collated together as well, so that we can ensure that in terms of a national perspective and training, that we're capturing that and making sure that we're getting that out to our specialist officers.
Right, thank you. And are the action plans then a sort of local community planning partnership type of thing to make sure that the actions are kind of followed through? Is that kind of done on a local level as opposed to national, or are they kind of mixture of both?
It's a mixture of.
Because probably areas are different. Probably different. There's a different picture for different areas, isn't there?
Yes, there is, and probably it's more a bespoke picture in terms of how that's taken forward on a case-by-case basis, depending on what that review has looked like.
No, that's very useful. Thanks very much, Laura, for that. Thank you.
Thanks, Caroline.
Thank you, Caroline. Grant, then Jane Ryder. Grant.
Thank you, Chair. And I'd also like to thank Malcolm and Laura for your very helpful explanations this morning. That's very useful. I fully support the important focus on this area. And I just wondered if in para 3.1 you refer to significant investment in finance and resources so that we can better understand your expectations. I wonder if you could say a bit more, clarify a bit more about what you're looking for and when, please.
Thanks, Grant. I think that's a bit of a teaser to some extent in terms of, you know, we need to do the work to shape up the business cases that are going to give us the detail that we would bring into the authority. But I think it would be remiss if we didn't recognise, with the increase in demands, the new types of crime, our own ambition and expectation. You know, we're going to have to build some capacity in this area. We've already done a lot of work with police officers. I think through the investment of technology and some early work that we're doing, and also a growth in the use of staff, we can get a much better series of outcomes across this area. But we have to go through that work and what's laid out in terms of the strategic approach to violence against women and girls, and then encompassing that as a key part of the Public Protection Development Programme will result in a series of cases that will come forward, and if they can be dealt with within Police Scotland, then they will be, and if they need to come through to the Scottish Police Authority in terms of investment, which I suspect many of them will, then that's still to come down the line.
Thank you, Malcolm. It would be quite useful to have some idea of the timeline that you expect these business cases to come through, and particularly to understand whether you're, to some extent, you're actually talking about reallocating existing resources in a different direction, and to what extent it's fresh investment, so that we are able to support you in the right way, in the right time. Thank you.
Of course.
Thank you, Grant. I think there's a commitment to bring a broader paper on public protection to us later on this year, Malcolm. So I think that might be a vehicle by which you might indicate some of what Grant is asking for there. So I'll leave that with you, because I think that's a reasonable joint endeavour for us. Caroline, you still got your hand up. Am I? Okay, down. So I've got Jane and then Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry. Thank you, Chair. And it was a question to Malcolm and possibly even to Laura, and it may be one where you bring the answer to the Policing Performance Committee, but at para 234 and 235, you refer to the increase of public concern in respect of spiking, and talk about the activity undertaken, the priority to understand the scale and nature of the spiking problem. And I wonder if you actually do now understand the scale and the nature, and what are the implications of that? Thank you.
Thank you. I'll defer to Laura, who's been leading some excellent work in this area in recent months.
Thanks, sir. Thanks, Jane. So obviously this was an issue that kicked off round about Freshers Week back in September, October time. Now the reporting, it appears now on reflection that significant increase in reporting has came about as a result of the media and social media attention that it was given at that time. I've certainly been engaged with, we've been running regular weekly goal groups chaired by ACC Gary Ritchie in the partnership and prevention side of the business, and I've also been attending the National Police Chief Council meeting, the national meeting, just to see what the picture looks like across the UK. I'm pleased to say that it's on a significant downward trajectory in terms of actually what we're seeing, and in fact in the last week, the 10th 10th of January to the 16th of January, we had no crimes submitted. Now, I appreciate that through the pandemic, obviously there have been restrictions on nightclubs, etc. In the previous few weeks, but prior to that, I think back on the 20th of December, we had 10 recorded, and between the following couple of weeks, it was down at 3. So we look at each of these cases on a very case-by-case basis. There are SPOCs in each of the divisions who are very intrusive in terms of the investigations. And whilst, you know, that is on a downward trajectory, it doesn't negate the fact that people are perhaps not feeling safe when they're out in public places and are concerned. We're only now starting to see the outcome of the forensic results, and I'm pleased to say that we're not seeing any drugs within people's systems that we would class as being a drug that would be used in spiking. There is clearly alcohol involved. There is clearly recreational drug use involved. However, we don't have any identified cases of any spiking by injection in Scotland at this time. We will obviously continue to monitor that under the direction of ACC Ritchie over the coming weeks and months, and we're very interested to see what it will be like over the festive period. That probably hasn't given us a true picture because of the restrictions that were put in place during that period. But as I say, over the coming weeks and months, we will continue to keep a close eye on that. Hopefully that answers your question, Jane.
Yes, it does. Thank you. And it's just very interesting to see that reflection, the use of the forensic evidence and what the implications are, which may be somewhat different from what had been originally assumed. But thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jane. Paul?
Yeah, it's much more of a generic question about the necessity of cultural change across Scotland in this particular issue. And what I'm wondering is what countries in the world are exemplars in this area, and who should we be aiming to emulate, and what are we not doing that they are doing?
That's a great question. I don't know who's able to answer that. Malcolm, start with you.
Thank you. I mean, it is a great question. I would invite others who have a view to come in on the back of a short response from myself. I think you can look at conditions that exist in other countries, but I think you need to apply it to the context and history that you're operating within. And Scotland has its own context and history as a nation, you know, within the UK, within Europe. When we have looked elsewhere, I actually think Scotland's an exemplar in many, many ways. Now, that's not to say that we think we're in a great position as a society around about the prevalence of violence against women and girls. Look at the numbers of domestic abuse incidents. We get about 180 reported a day. You know, to some extent, the fact that that's tolerated within our society more broadly is in itself an indictment of the culture that we have. And we've already explored some of the increase in data and reporting around about rape and sexual crime and the prevalence of that. So it's not to say that there's a huge amount of work to do, but I don't see anywhere necessarily that's in a much better place. What I do see in Scotland, and I think Police Scotland are at the forefront of leading this, is a willingness to acknowledge the scale and extent of the issues. And by doing that, we can move towards changing those cultural attitudes and behaviours and the environment which permits this conduct to continue, whether in private space or more publicly. And I'm actually really optimistic that Scotland's got all the right ingredients as a nation to be able to tackle it and improve it as we go forward. That's not to say there aren't some things happening that will continue to drag us back as well as a nation. You know, the challenges that young people face through the type of material that can be accessed online readily and frequently, and how that plays into children and young people's development and attitudes. You know, it pull people in the wrong direction. We're acutely aware of that. So all sorts of complexities in seeking to answer that question, and we will continue, as we do in other areas as a police service, to interact, to gain research, and to work collaboratively with, you know, policing colleagues across the world where there is good practice in this area. But I think we're at the forefront of many of the initiatives in tackling this, and the performance, and making sure that we're acknowledging the extent of the problem in order to try and tackle it. Goes back millennia, let's face it, and therefore we're going to have to be working hard for many years to come to improve this.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Paul. Are there any other questions? If I can just conclude then, this will be the subject of conversation between us. Sorry, Chief Constable, before I conclude, I would bring you in. I didn't see your hand. My apologies.
Tom Martin, thank you. I just wanted to offer a few comments of my own, and again, was really grateful to listen to that debate and the questions, and really grateful to Laura and Malcolm, but also to members. I think there's a couple of points, if I may, I would like to make. The first one is that our commitment and approach to tackling violence against women and girls doesn't sit in isolation from everything else we're doing as an organisation, and the questions that have been raised and discussions alluded to that. So how we allocate our resources, what we mean by frontline policing, the need to have a proper estate that our officers and staff can work in and can feel comfortable in, our commitment to develop our online capability through our cyber strategy, and the need to have key investments in all these areas, because that's actually crucial to our commitment to tackling violence against women and girls. We know we need to have an increased capability in digital forensic. We know we need to have resources who are policing the private space, who are policing the virtual space. So I think that is a really important point to make, that the meeting today, we heard earlier from Deb Kerr and discussions we had with Paul and others about how we're working with local scrutiny panels, and actually part of our task, and I think the authority has a role and a responsibility in this area as well, is to work with our key partners to make it clear what the police role is and what we mean by frontline policing. And actually our challenge to police the three domains, the public space, the private space and the virtual space, and that commitment, that need, that absolute moral and professional duty actually is part of our commitment to tackling violence against women and girls. Where the resources are based, what they do, the profile of them, our strategic workforce plan, all of that, all of these issues and elements will help us in our approach to tackling violence against women and girls. So I think that was important as my first point, that actually the whole of the organisation is shaping in this area, and Malcolm and Laura and the leadership that's been demonstrated from right across the organisation, and Fiona in terms of the work internally. I think that point that was made about, we need to make sure we are treating our own people properly so we can go and protect our fellow citizens. It's a key area right about our principles of well-being. It's a key principle of our approach to gender equality and diverse inclusion in general. My second point is a challenge that was laid out, I think, right from the outset from Michelle and Katrina and others, is that the recognition, which I'm grateful for, of that leadership, commitment and drive. And I totally accept that leadership, commitment and drive is not a guarantee of improvement and change, but it absolutely is a prerequisite of improvement and change. And that's what you will get from Police Scotland. I said at the outset, we will look those issues right in the eye. We know that this is an issue, as Paul alluded to, it's international, it's all elements of society. The finance sector in Scotland, the media in Scotland, the political institutions and parties in Scotland, all of these areas face issues around about misogyny and about equality and diversity and inclusion. We want to work with these. We want to identify best practice, whether it's local, whether it's national, whether it's international. But we are absolutely committed to doing that. We are absolutely committed to making those improvements, because we know that policing has a leadership role to play because of our coercive powers and our duties to ensure safety, security and well-being for every citizen, and absolutely for safety, security and well-being of all the women and girls in Scotland. So those 2 points are absolutely crucial, that this commitment to improving how policing deals with violence against women and girls actually has a whole host of other factors that will help that in terms of this organisation. And secondly, that as an organisation, from myself as Chief Constable, but right across the leadership team, we're utterly committed to this, and we're going to continue to drive progress in the months and years ahead. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Very, very welcome. My comments are these. Katrina Stewart speaks for the whole board when she makes such a positive statement about your policy commitment in this area. And it is very welcome that we're able to say that publicly and then follow that statement by your statement then of personal commitment and organisational commitment, Chief Constable. That is critical. In Scotland, as in elsewhere, success often goes unrecognised or under-recognised and under-commented on. I just want to bring out the verification process you introduced, Malcolm spoke about, and the Men's Responsibility public campaign. Those were both thoughtful and progressive. It is extraordinary that a police service can do that so quickly, and I'm very proud of Police Scotland were able to be at the forefront and leading on those areas. And the greatest flattery to you, you are being copied elsewhere about both the thoughtful nature of verification and then the men's responsibility in terms of sexual violence. And I think there's a personal commitment there, and I see your senior officers personally committed to these things, and you're committing the organisation. That shouldn't be underestimated by a police authority. We shouldn't underestimate this degree of policy commitment and personal commitment. So I commend you, and I reflect on Katrina's far more eloquent view of that than mine. I'd also say, in terms of the multi-assurance evidence we receive, it is very interesting that the Diffley report on trust in public bodies firstly put policing so high in terms of trust above charities, for example, in Scotland, but also they did some data analysis in terms of women had a higher degree of trust in Scotland than men in policing. I think we should look to multiple assurance evidence about where policing is, and that's one of the assurances that we seek. The issue I think we've spent most time here, and we shouldn't recognise the strategic commitment you have, I don't want to in any way take away from that, is closing the gap between your ambition and service standards, between what you aspire to as a Chief Constable and senior officers, what Laura manages, and what sometimes falls short of those standards. And that's not to say the glass is half full. The evidence you've given, the evidence you've given us is that there's some very positive lived experience coming back. And I thought the rape crisis has sent a 77% positive response to those victims who the experience of policing was extraordinary. But our focus will be through policing performance on the 23. Our focus will be on what Laura and Malcolm want to do to narrow that gap. But it's always within the context of this positive and very, very welcome, strong policy commitment in this area, which I think is exemplary. So I'm looking forward to the policy, our Policing Performance Committee, hearing more about this, hearing more of the data. As you know, I think that is what reinforces this drive to narrow the gap. And all organisations wish to narrow the gap between what they aspire to and what they deliver. But I say from this conversation, there's an incredibly positive view from the board about what you're attempting to do. And each of us, including each of you in the senior management of policing, have a shared ambition to be even better in this area. And I'd like to finish by saying thank you to DCS McCluskey and all her staff who are actually engaged at the front end of this business with all the challenges that they face in this area. And I've enjoyed hearing her and enjoyed hearing from Malcolm about a complete openness about improvement. And as you said, Ian, that it's not your ambition that's going to drive this, because your ambition is absolutely there. The success will be on the delivery from the quality of your staff. And I'm absolutely convinced that we have a lot to teach other police services, but also we have always a lot to learn. So what I'm going to propose is, because I've spoken to Michelle about this, we might talk with Malcolm about having at some stage when you're further into your draft strategy, which is in the paper, and before you set up your reference group, to have a wider SPA seminar on what we can learn from other jurisdictions, how we are with your draft strategy, and what improvements that the SPA, because that's important that we learn these lessons, can make in this area. So thank you, Michelle, for agreeing to do that. Sometime I would have thought in March or April, when you are nearer to completing your bespoke strategy in this area. So I can just make that time. I think that was a commitment to Malcolm and I agreed would be a good next step for us, rather than in addition to the detailed review of the practice, which I think will be Michelle's view, both as chair of the committee, trying to understand how that is analysed, what the lessons learned. That was quite a lot of the conversation. So, Michelle, are you comfortable with this?
Yes, Chair, very happy to do that. Thank
you very much. With that, thank you very much. Thank you, Malcolm, and thank you, Laura, for the presentation. Thank you for the oversight, Chief Constable. Very, very, very welcome. We will return to this in detail in committee and broadly within, at least within the public protection conversation and paper led by, again, Malcolm Graham sometime later this year. Oh, and there's Fiona McQueen. We're just about to leave this topic. Fiona, welcome. Nice.
Thank you. Apologies for having to miss the morning.
I think the issues that I know that you were interested in have been addressed through the conversations,
yes,
but I will catch up with you, as with Michelle, if there are any other issues. So it's just 3:05. Sorry, 1. Feels like 3:05. We have a reasonably short private agenda. I will going to ask you to stay on for the private agenda, and then we can discuss whether or not we want to take a fuller break before that agenda. So thank you very much for all of those who have attended and all those who have been listening to the live stream. I'm going to stop